One sunny day, the girls were whispering. One of them asked if the other had been there yesterday. The other exclaimed that it was great, adding that it was all people had been talking about lately. Meanwhile, on the road, a man yelled, calling the other a jerk, and asked if the other man had bought a license. The other man replied to tell him to go fuck himself. The guy happily said over the phone that if the person he was talking to had seen one man's face, the other man would have clearly been shocked. He added that he was sure if he asked for a promotion, he would get it right away. The man stood in the middle of the noisy place and wondered where he was. The air was stinky, and the hum of voices around him drowned everything out. He wondered, for this was definitely not the kingdom he lived in. He didn't know what this place was, but he knew it wasn't an illusion. It was too realistic. He decided to find out where he was. People began to whisper, wondering who this poor guy was that was standing there. One of them asked if he was homeless. The noise filled his mind, hurting him. The man frowned and thought with annoyance that it was too noisy in here. The Flame Emperor was called his name for a reason. Anyone who spoke that name was doomed to die. Everyone who fought him had no doubt that the Flame Emperor himself was standing in front of them. He knew neither pity nor tears. Despite his human form, he had long since ceased to be human. A trail of blood followed him, and the cries of the injured could be heard. No one dared to follow his path, for he was the god of death. He killed the supreme master of the dark path, Murim, and forced the leader of the heavenly demon cult to kneel. For these feats, he was considered the pinnacle among light and dark warriors, and he became known as the god of martial arts. One day he was sitting on top of a cliff, looking out over the village and drinking tea. The man thought that his past was like a dream now. All his life he had known only blood and violence. But a little girl picking flowers came to mind. She exclaimed joyfully how beautiful they were. The emperor asked why she saw beauty in the petals. The little girl puffed up her cheeks and wondered if he didn't know what joy was. She explained that joy is when you laugh and dance with happiness, even if there is no special reason for it. The girl added that someday he would understand this, but for now she would share her joy with him. The emperor realized that meeting her had melted his heart. He suddenly realized what tears and laughter were. Never before had he thought that there could be joy in his life of chaos and evil. She had found her happiness, but he didn't know what to do next. Should he go in search of happiness? Or should he not get carried away with laughter and tears? Puzzled by the question, the man wondered if he had achieved eternal immortality. Suddenly all the petals rose into the air, swirled around him in a magical vortex, and the man instantly disappeared. The next second, when he opened his eyes, he found himself in a dark cave. Looking around, he wondered where he was. Did he think he had just been on the path to immortality? Or had someone cast an illusion on him and he hadn't noticed? Either way, he needed to find a way out and assess the whole situation. Suddenly, a giant monster appeared behind him, and its ominous roar hung in the air. At that time, a portal opened and the leader ordered the Alpha group to enter immediately. He reminded them that if anything suspicious was detected, they should report immediately. He emphasized that their job was to reconnoiter and return alive, wishing them good luck. One of the men remarked that the portal looked like a Class A portal, but it was suspiciously quiet. The other replied sharply that the other was a moron and had probably been asleep during the briefing. He reminded her that A-class portals were home to the smartest monsters. The girl reminded him that it had been 5 years since Group Zero guardsmen had died in a similar situation. They had gone too far into the portal, where a whole darkness of monsters were waiting for them. No one had survived. The man scratched the back of his head and tried to apologize, but the girl interrupted him and ordered him not to move. The girl in her thoughts cursed herself for not even sensing the presence of the enemy. When had that one appeared? The A-class monster lurked as if pretending to be dead. The man, stammering in shock, pointed at the monster and said, "Commander, look." Suddenly, the commander rushed forward and ordered to retreat because she would somehow delay the monster. But looking closely at the monster, they noticed a huge hole in its body, as if part of it had been ripped out from the inside. The man reported that numerous corpses of Class A Cyclops and Class B monsters were found in the cave. All of the higher monsters had been killed. He reported that the exploration was continuing. The man approached the commander and reported that he had reported everything about the current situation to the center. The girl praised him. He suggested that perhaps the monsters were just fighting among themselves. The commander replied that even if that was the case, the inferior creatures could not have injured the Cyclops in such a way. So another guild was hunting here. Recently, raids had only been conducted in high-level portals. The man wondered in amazement, is there really a guild in South Korea that operates freely and no one knows about it? Stepping out of the portal and looking around, the emperor wondered again what this place was. He thought as he opened his eyes and realized something important, he was in a cave full of monsters. Why were the monsters he could have killed with a single blow coming at him in the first place? He somehow found his way out and wondered what these ruins were, and if there was any life left here. As he stripped the clothes off the skeleton, he noted that he was in yet another unfamiliar place. There was dirt, ruins, and weathered remains all around. He felt no signs of life. He thought to himself with rage in his eyes and with annoyance, the damned sorcerers. The man remembered that he had encountered a heavenly demon cult, whose mages used forbidden magic. He felt something similar to that now. He could purify his surroundings from such magic, but he should look around before using his power. He decided that he should get out of here first, go somewhere where there would be less of this black energy. Meanwhile, in the cafe, they were discussing the news. The Korean Awakened Association had not expressed a clear position on the incident. In America and China, where there are zero-level awakened ones, there were discussions about the new portal. A girl sat at the table and asked when they would be served jjajangmyeon. The restaurant's senior manager, Lim So-young, carrying the dishes, said it was on its way. She quickly put the dishes on the table and happily wished them a pleasant appetite. A visitor entered this restaurant and the girl greeted him happily, noting that she hadn't seen him in a while. The director of the Awakened Association, Baek Eun-ho, tiredly asked for a plate of jjajangmyeon. He looked tired, and the girl anxiously asked if he was feeling ill. He sat down and told her that a new portal in the Deadlands had opened again today. With anger, Baek Eun-ho stated that the guilds were fired up over this portal, and they would just burn out on the job trying to resolve this conflict. He added that there is a lot of pressure on them. Everyone wants to get their hands on the portal, and they are also after the magic stones. Recently, there has been an increase in fatalities during the raids. The restaurant manager, Yu Sun-tae, confirmed that the portals are indeed multiplying. Baek said that this strain is killing them, but on the other hand, it has its upside. More magic stones on the market means lowering their price. Yu Sun-tae remarked that the monsters aren't happy at all, and there are fewer customers. Baek Eun-ho added that not many people would dare to go out at this hour. An angry man walked into the cafe and said that he couldn't work like this anymore. He took out his phone, and showing the article yelled that a new portal had opened, and he couldn't take it anymore. Yu Sun-tae frowned, trying to calm him down by reminding him of his recent pay raise. However, the man was adamant, claiming that the risk was too great and his life was worth more. He demanded to either increase his pay or look for another courier. Yu Sun-tae was confused and asked how the man could do such a thing. The man responded by saying that either he would be paid more for the risks or let them look for another fool courier. Yu Sun-tae touched his wife's shoulder and said it was time to pick up Ha-yoon and asked her to go get her. Lim So-young said it wasn't time yet, but Sun-tae interrupted her and said she might be late. She got nervous, but without arguing, said she would be back soon. Yu Sun-tae thought that many people were moving because of the new portals, afraid for their lives. It's become difficult to find workers, so this man is being so brazen. He, on the other hand, had only recently settled and didn't want to leave, complaining that it was hard to find a decent courier now. Meanwhile, Emperor Yamru thought that everything here was very different from his homeland, but there were still similarities. He felt that many of the locals possessed an inner energy. Especially a little girl with a clear and bright aura caught his attention. Her energy was very different from the others, and he thought that perhaps this child knew something. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind came, causing the woman holding the child's hand to flinch in surprise. The wind ripped the headband off the girl, and she dropped her mother's hand and ran after it. Lim So-young shouted at her, telling her not to run, it was dangerous. Trying to catch up with the headband, the girl ran out onto the road, saying it was a gift from her father. The headband fell on the road. The girl grabbed it with both hands and said that she had finally caught it. Joyfully shrieking, she raised the headband above her head and looked happily at her mother. But at that moment, a truck flew out of the corner, rushing straight at the girl. Time seemed to freeze, and then came the mother's shrill scream, which shook the air. At the last moment, The man managed to grab the child in his arms and swiftly dodge the collision with the truck. Yomru is alarmed to see that the girl is almost under the wheels of the truck. His gaze is tense, and his voice sounds concerned as he leans over to the child and asks if she is hurt and how she feels after the accident. Beck immediately runs up to his daughter, shouting her name in panic, and then exhales with relief when he sees that the baby is unharmed. Bowing to her savior, she thanks him profusely, confessing that she doesn't know how she could thank him for helping her so much. Yomru, trying not to pay attention to his actions, gently replies that no thanks are necessary, because the most important thing is that the child is unharmed. In his mind, he notes that he has given the girl some energy by strengthening her nervous system, and he is sure that she will soon recover completely. Beck looks worriedly at Yomru and asks if he's all right, offering to help him get to the hospital. Yomru waves him off, assuring him that he feels fine. However, his stomach suddenly makes a loud, treacherous sound. Realizing how hungry he is, he remembers that he only ate one single dumpling all day. Ha-yoon, watching him with interest, declares that her father is a skilled cook and suggests that they all go out to dinner together. Lim, supporting her daughter, strongly insists that Yomru shouldn't go hungry because he saved their child. At first, Yomru refuses, emphasizing that he did not act for reward. But after a moment, his stomach speaks again and he agrees with a slight smile. At the cafe, Yu Sun-tai is horrified to realize that his daughter has almost been hit by a car. He looks worriedly into her eyes and asks her if she's in pain, and then offers to take her to the hospital immediately. Lim takes charge of the situation, reassuring her husband and assuring him that the girl is perfectly fine. She tells him how this man saved their daughter and says she's already invited him over for dinner. Yu Sun-tae turns to Yomru with gratitude and tells him to order whatever dish he wants and invites him to take a seat at the table. In response, Yomru thanks the host for his hospitality. Ha-yoon, noticing that Kang Seo's clothes are dirty, says it's not appropriate to sit at the table with dirty clothes. Kang Seo silently lowered his eyes. It's as if he's just now noticing how dirty his clothes are. Yu Sun-tae suggests using the shower while dinner is being prepared. Yomru, slightly embarrassed, says he's fine with it, as long as he doesn't inconvenience his hosts. A few minutes later, Yu Sun-tae brings him a change of clothes, explaining that he's recently gained weight, so these clothes don't fit him anymore. But they'll fit Yomru perfectly. Once in the bathroom, Yomru looks around curiously, marveling at his surroundings. The walls here are too shiny, the familiar well is missing. When his gaze falls on the toilet bowl, he studies it for a while, then calls out to the owner and, slightly embarrassed, asks him to come over for a moment. He apologizes, saying that the water from the well is not enough for a shower. Beck, hearing these words, is puzzled and asks which well he is referring to. When Yomru points to the toilet bowl, Baek is astonished and explains that it is not a well at all, but a toilet bowl. With a slight hesitation, Yomru clarifies whether this place is really meant for such use. Yu Sun-tae discreetly confirms that the water in the toilet bowl is the same as the water in the faucet, but that it is certainly not for washing. He then explains in detail how to use the shower and demonstrates by turning on the water. Yomru takes a step back, watching in amazement as a stream of water whips from the metal watering can. Frowning, he wonders what that strange snake is that spits water. After a while, Yomru comes out of the bathroom and is relieved that he is finally feeling well. Yu Sun-tae says he finally washed his face. Yu Sun-tae wonders where he came from, as he seems to be seeing a toilet for the first time. Yomru thinks for a moment before answering, and finally decides to say that he's lost his memory. He shares with his hosts that he only remembers fragments of his past and has no idea how he ended up in this place. Yu Sun-tae thinks about it and suggests that he may have come out of one of the mysterious portals that appear in their world. Yomru asks interestedly about the portals. Yu Sun-tae explains that they are peculiar doors to another dimension that have recently started to open for unknown reasons. Sometimes people are accidentally sucked inside and find themselves isolated, having to fight for survival. Upon their return, some of them lose their memory. Such people are called isolationists. Realizing that the conversation has gone on too long, Yu Sun-tae suggests that they postpone further explanations and start dinner while the food is still hot. Yomru thanks him and asks with interest, "What is this food in front of them?" He thought the color of this food was suspicious. In the back of his mind, he felt a familiar uneasiness. This color reminded him of the dark times of initiation. when, to stay alive, he had to drink dirty water murky with blood and decomposing bodies. His troubled thoughts were interrupted by Ha-Yun. She leaned closer to him and asked why he wasn't eating. Did he not like the black noodles? Yomru, a little confused, asked with a little puzzlement. Black noodles? How do you eat black noodles? The girl giggled happily, took the fork in her hands, and began to enthusiastically demonstrate. She said she had to stir it like this and then wrap it around the fork. Picking up the fork on which a portion of noodles was already coiled, she held it out to him with a radiant smile and cheerfully said, Here, eat! Mom, who was watching them fondly, gently intervened, reminding her daughter to say, Eat, please. Yomru, tasting the dish with surprise, felt that the flavor was just fine. He ate a few more forks and thought with delight that he had never tasted anything tastier than this dish. Yusuntai regretfully admitted that he wished he could treat them to something better. Lim smilingly assured that they would have a better dinner next time. Yomru, having finished his portion with gusto, asked for another plate of this amazing dish. Ha-Yun looked at him cheerfully, giggled and pointed her finger at his cheek and said that uncle had gotten dirty again. When dinner came to an end, they went outside and Yomru pronounced that the meal was delicious. Yusuntai replied that no thanks were needed and that they were always welcome. He invited Yomru to come back whenever he wanted to eat jjajangmyeon. Yomru noticed a piece of paper with an inscription on the wall. The words caught his attention and he turned to his host and asked what they meant. Yusuntai explained that it was an advertisement looking for a courier to deliver food. They had couriers, but all turned out to be too expensive to keep, so now they were in urgent need of a new employee. Yomru said it states that the job is live-in. Does that mean the courier is provided with accommodation? Yusuntai nodded and said that there weren't many people willing to work as it is. Yomru suddenly realized that he needed to settle down somewhere since he couldn't return to his world yet. He would work and learn how the world worked. Yomru looked directly at Yusuntai and asked with a serious expression if he could get a job as a courier. Yusuntai was slightly surprised and asked if that was really what he wanted. Yomru scratched the back of his head and admitted that he would be very grateful, but hiring isolationists involved legal difficulties. Lim intervened in a soft but confident voice. She reminded him that Yomru had been saved by Ha-Yun. Aren't they obligated to try to help him in return? She added that if a citizen took a surety bond, the isolationist could get a job. There was determination in her voice when she said that this meeting was not a coincidence. She offered her husband to vouch for him and he would become their courier. Yusuntai thought for a moment and then nodded in agreement. Then he said that she was right. There was such a way. He was silent for a moment, thinking it over again, then nodded confidently and said that he would vouch for him. Yomru looked at him and said firmly that he would do his best and justify his trust. After a short pause, he introduced himself and said his name was Kang Seo, and he was 35 years old. Yusuntai laughed and said, What a surprise, they are the same age. He looks much younger, and since they're the same age, he said he'd like to speak to him on a first-name basis. Yomru agreed with a smile. Ha-Yun happily exclaimed that she would call him Kang Seo from now on. He remembered how the girl had once said that name would remind him to smile more often. He noted with slight irony that she certainly wasn't very good at coming up with names. But Ha-Yun just laughed merrily and said that it was a very pretty name, Kang Seo, which means wide smile. He took her hand and said with sincere tenderness that he agreed to bear the name. The next morning there were many crows circling outside the cafe. Their cawing filled the air. Kang Seo sat in the semi-darkness and concentrated on gathering the energy within him. He could feel the pure, untainted power flowing everywhere in this world. This world was full of wonders in the everyday life of people, so many objects that it was sometimes difficult for him to even imagine their purpose. Suddenly the door creaked open and Yu Songtae entered the room. He looked at Kang Seo in surprise and asked why he was sitting in the dark. Kang Seo calmly replied that he just couldn't find a lamp, so he was sitting like that. Yu Songtae chuckled slightly and thought that he should be taught how to turn on the light. He walked over to the wall, pointed to the light switch, and showed him how to turn on the lights. He said that all he had to do was press this button and the room would immediately become bright. Kang Seo leaned forward with genuine interest and admitted that it was interesting. Lim entered the room. Upon seeing them, she smiled warmly and wished them good morning, surprised that they were already up. Kang Seo nodded politely and asked if she was heading to the kitchen to cook. Meanwhile, Yu Suntai walked over to the stove, checking the equipment, and said that he hadn't yet, but they would start opening soon. There was a lot of work today. Kang Seo offered his help, asking if there was anything he could do to help them around the house. Yu Suntai looked at him with slight surprise, asking him if he wanted to help, because he could still sleep. He didn't want to make him work overtime. Kang Seo confidently replied that he just wanted to repay the kindness he had received. Then Yu Suntai briefly suggested that he go clean the house. He handed him a vacuum cleaner and explained that it was a device that made cleaning easier and was called a vacuum cleaner. He showed him how to use it and said that he had to press a button and it started sucking up dust and debris. He advised me to run it over the floor like a mop and added that it was easy. Laughing, he said that even Ha-Yun sometimes helps them with cleaning. Looking at Kang Seo's face, Yu Suntai frowned and asked if he was okay. Kang Seo replied with a slight effort that he was fine. Yu Suntai warned that although the vacuum cleaner was old, it was very powerful, so he had to be careful. He hesitantly asked if he was sure he could handle it. Then, glancing at his watch, he added that it was time for him to go to the kitchen and said that the cleaning was now in his hands. Kang Seo nodded and agreed. When he was alone, he looked at the strange device in his hands and thought that despite its appearance of simplicity, it looked quite dangerous, but it still needed to be cleaned up. Kang Seo concentrated his internal energy into his palm, wondering if he could use magic. He began to direct the streams of his power to the surface of the floor and ceiling, feeling every tiny particle. With a slight wiggle of his fingers, he summoned a stream of air, and all the dust from every corner of the restaurant swirled, gathering in front of him in a dense vortex. Once the room was clear of dust, he directed his attention to the bucket of water, causing the liquid to rise smoothly upwards. With a slight movement of his hand again, he caused a rain of tiny droplets to rain down, bringing cleanliness everywhere. When the cleaning was finished, Kang Seo looked at the result of his work and was pleased to see that he had done a good job. At that moment, Yu Suntai walked in, and Kang Seo looked at him and calmly said that he had cleaned up the place using his unconventional methods and asked him how he felt about the result. Yu Suntai gave a stunned look and asked if he had just used an ability. Kang Seo calmly clarified if he meant controlling the element of water and confirmed that he had indeed. Yu Suntai immediately asked if he was a high-level awakened person. Kang Seo bewilderedly asked who these awakened ones were. Yu Suntai began to explain, saying that it was a word for people who suddenly awakened unique superpowers. He added that this began to appear 25 years ago, after the opening of the portal. He explained that such abilities are called aura, and the possessors of these gifts can control the elements or even use telekinesis. Depending on the level of control over the aura, each awakened person is assigned a certain class. The higher the class, the higher the person's social status and the influence they enjoy. Yu Suntai said that he used to work as a loader and had encountered awakened ones before, but he had never seen anyone who controlled their aura as skillfully and accurately as he did. He added that with such an outstanding talent, he shouldn't waste his time at the restaurant, but rather join the hunting guild. Kang Seo didn't hesitate and replied that he didn't even plan on becoming a hunter. Yu Suntai was shocked by this statement and suggested that he didn't fully understand what kind of world he was in, because here, high-ranking awakened people live like nobles. Kang Seo confessed that what he heard made him even less interested in becoming a hunter. He added that he had experienced wealth and fame in the past, but realized too late how perishable it all was. Slightly wary, Yu Songtae questioned if his past life memory was really coming back to him. Kang Seo shook his head and honestly admitted that he still couldn't remember the details of his former life. He said that he used to live in a completely different world, until one day he had fallen into a state of total oblivion, from which he woke up inside one of the portals that Yu Suntai had mentioned. He continued his story, explaining that he had managed to escape and reach this city by following a source of pure energy. Along the way, he had managed to save a girl named Ha-Yun, who was almost hit by a passing iron wagon. Kang Seo admitted with a guilty look that he didn't mean to deceive them and apologized, thinking to himself that perhaps he should have told the whole truth from the beginning. Yu Songtae put his hand on his shoulder and, while struggling to hold back tears, said that he had gone through unthinkable ordeals. He suggested that it was scary for him to be in a completely foreign world. Kang Seo asked him if he really believed him, to which Yu Sun-tai replied sincerely that if he had been in his shoes, he wouldn't have been able to tell him right away. He suggested that Kang Seo should be an isolationist just in case, and that he should think about taking the superpower test. After all, such a procedure could change his fate and life for the better. At the same time, in the Awakened Support Department building, in the office of the first group, an employee was sleeping at the desk. A girl entered the room and loudly called his name, addressing him as Sung Jin Ho. He instantly woke up, quickly fixing his glasses, and asked what was wrong. The girl asked with a displeased look, wondering if he had spent the whole night at work again, warning him that such behavior could end badly. Jin Ho asked with weariness in his voice, why did she come just to tell him off? Myung-hee bluntly asked what was going on in his department if he had to work around the clock. He irritatedly replied with a counter-question, what did she think? All because of a case he has absolutely no idea where to start working with. Myung-hee handed him a fresh document and said it might be helpful. She inquired if he was still looking for an Awakened Zero class. When Jin Ho scrutinized the contents, he was surprised and read that the chairman had unexpectedly ordered him to close the case. Jin Ho asked if the chairman really didn't want them to find an Awakened Zero class. He exclaimed how could such a decision even be made. Myung-hee firmly explained that it was a direct order from the chairman himself. Jin Ho then indignantly stated that this was the first time they had a chance to obtain their own O-class Awakened One. Myung-hee anxiously remarked that if they continued to investigate, there might be consequences. After all, they still hadn't managed to find this person until now, and everyone already knew about it. Moreover, they still weren't sure if it was even possible to kill such creatures with their bare hands. After all, everything points to the fact that all the monsters were destroyed by a single person. Or maybe it wasn't a human at all. Jin Ho, clutching his head tightly with his hands, said that he had no doubt it was a human. He explained that he had personally analyzed all the wounds on the bodies of the monsters inside the gate, and every single mark pointed to a single person's fist strikes. He had checked it more than once, and each time the result was confirmed. He said that the only chance in front of them was now. If they could find this awakened man, Korea would finally take its rightful place among the allied countries of the alliance. Myung-hee thoughtfully asked what would happen if they started searching but ended up not being able to find anyone. Jin Ho confidently told her not to be afraid, because they would definitely find him. Myung-hee grinned and said that he really couldn't be stopped after all. She then promised that she would take responsibility for the chairman and let him continue investigating as quickly as possible. Jin Ho stood up and inquired with interest if she was leaving on business or would she be having lunch. She replied that she had an appointment with her younger brother. He then asked if it was about paramedic Kim from the sanitary unit, to which Myung-hee suggested that if he hadn't eaten lunch yet, he join them. Jin Ho declined, saying that this time he would just buy something at the store and eat lunch right in the office. He inquired about what she was going to eat. Myung-hee admitted that she didn't know yet, and added that her brother said like it's a famous restaurant not far from here, but she didn't specify what kind of food they serve there. Hearing this, Jin Ho remarked that if it's a famous restaurant nearby, he might have a clue what it's about. At the very least, he knows which restaurant their department head Beck would recommend. He asked in surprise, didn't she know that their boss was a serious taster? Myung-hee responded by exclaiming that her brother had also mentioned that their department head had recommended this restaurant to them. Jin Ho then came to the conclusion that this was probably the place that Mr. Baek loved so much. He pondered and wondered aloud what the name of this restaurant was. An hour later, Myung-hee, looking at the name of the place, read Spring Pavilion. Kim Myung-jin happily told his sister that he had long dreamed of having lunch with her at this place, because the jjajangmyeon here was incredible. He suddenly asked worriedly if she might not like the jjajangmyeon. Myung-hee smiled and replied that he was talking nonsense. After all, she came to dine with her dear little brother. How could she not like it? She thought to herself with a slight regret that she wanted to take him to an upscale restaurant at least once, not a simple place. She hurried him up and told him cheerfully that it was time to go, for she was very hungry. When she opened the door, she asked if this was the restaurant that department head Beck recommended to everyone, and if he liked it so much, the food must be excellent. When they went inside, a girl named Soyun greeted them warmly and invited them to sit down. She politely added that their place had a self-service system and told them to follow her. Myung-hee stated that it must be a really nice restaurant, So Young escorted them to a table, handed them a menu, and warned them to call her when they decided on their order. Myung-hee asked if it was really a good restaurant and why there were so few people around. Myung-jin told her to stop doubting. He assured his sister that the food here was delicious and suggested she take the menu to choose something to her liking. When she asked him if he had made up his mind, he immediately said that of course he would order the jjajangmyeon. Myung-hee, after a little thought, agreed with him and decided to try the same dish. Myung-jin raised his hand and called out to the girl to place the order. So Young walked over with a notepad in hand and asked what they would have. He mouthed 1 portion of pork in sweet and sour sauce and 2 portions of jjajangmyeon, madam. From what she heard, Myung-hee suddenly all the water she drank spit it back out. So-yoon remarked with a slight smile that he was a real gallant young man, calling her madam. As a reward, she promised to bring them a portion of dumplings on the house. Myung-hee was surprised to say that he was much more outgoing than she thought. Myung-jin replied that it was just basic courtesy. He asked how his sister was doing, adding that her department must be a mess right now because of the Class A portal incident. Myung-hee poured herself some water and tiredly remarked that a headache was probably the least of the evils that had haunted her since the incident. Continuing to talk, she said that this case had attracted too much attention, and if they couldn't find an awakened zero class, their association might finally lose its credibility and reputation. She added bitterly that the chairman had taken to giving orders to close the case. She then reminded her brother of her colleague Song Jin-ho from the support department, who had literally vowed to track down the awakened one at any cost. Hearing this, Myung-jin quietly said that she was probably having an incredibly hard time right now. Myung-hee nodded and admitted that of course the easiest thing to do would be to just close the case. But how could an opportunity like this be missed? She added that at least she and Jin-ho were making life difficult for themselves. Then she suddenly stopped talking after feeling something strong and immediately turned around. Myung-jin looked at his sister in surprise and worriedly asked what was wrong. But she didn't answer him anything, because she felt a powerful buildup of energy coming from the hall. Her gaze immediately darted towards Kang-seo. Myung-hee tensed up as she realized that something very strong was emanating from this man. She mentally noted that she hadn't sensed anything at all from him before this second D, and now there was a sudden surge of aura. She reasoned to herself that her aura detection ability had just worked on him. At the same time, a terrifying power emanated from him in an instant. She wondered if he was capable of suppressing his own aura so quickly. In her estimation, his power level was at least Class A, and perhaps he could very well be the very same awakened Class O. Meanwhile, So-yoon returned to their table with a slight smile, holding a neatly set tray and informing them that she had brought their order. Placing the food in front of them, she politely wished them a pleasant appetite. Myung-jin looked at the plates and said that it all looked amazing. Myung-hee, looking at the dishes carefully, nodded and said that the food did indeed look incredibly delicious. She wondered if perhaps she had just imagined it, and the whole aura surge thing was just her imagination caused by fatigue and hunger. Myung-hee ate a bite and asked if his brother had gone crazy. Jin worriedly asked if she liked the food, but then she suddenly exclaimed loudly, "Why did he hide this place from her and why didn't he bring her here earlier?" Myung-jin said that he knew she would really like this place. She eagerly replied that the jjajangmyeon was so delicious that it exceeded her expectations. Kang-seo sensed that one of the guests in the hall had an exceptional sense of aura. Ha-yoon, playing with a doll, called out to Kang-seo, reminding him that it was his turn to participate in the game. He reflected that the auras of these two were different, but they both possessed a high level of control and strength. Clutching the toy in his hands, he concluded that he should remain vigilant and not reveal his true level of strength. Kang-seo decided that he needed to learn more about the awakened ones. When all the customers had left the restaurant, Kang-seo raised his palm up and easily cleared the entire room in a matter of seconds. After inspecting the perfect cleanliness around him, he thought that it was still not as clean as he wanted, but it would go. He reflected that he was just getting used to life in this new world, but the kind owners of the place had already taught him a lot. He noted to himself that there were still a lot of things he didn't know, but he would learn in time, because he didn't need to hurry. Kang-seo concluded that he should pay special attention to studying those called awakened in this world. Suddenly, he became alert as he felt a strange sound and the rapid approach of something unknown. He stepped outside, and as he listened, he wondered what that growling was. Yu Song-tae appeared in front of him, taking off his helmet from his head. He informed him that he had arrived just in time, after all. He was going to show him something. Kang Seo looked at the strange device in surprise and asked, "What was that loud sound, and was it really coming from that thing?" Yu Suntae explained with a slight smile that the vehicle in front of him was a vehicle called a motorcycle. It was designed for fast riding, and he would soon need it for his job as a courier. He added that, of course, he would need to learn how to ride it first, which might take some time, but for now, it was worth just getting used to it. Yu Suntae tossed Kang Seo the helmet and told him with a smile to put it on and not to complain. Kang Seo asked with interest what the item was, to which Yu Suntae replied that it was a safety helmet. He explained that the motorcycle was very fast and therefore very dangerous, so riding without a helmet was unacceptable. As Kang Seo put on the helmet, he noted to himself that it was very similar to the battle helmets that warriors wore before a battle. Yu Suntae asked if he had already put on the helmet, and when he got the answer, he asked Kang Seo to sit behind him on the motorcycle. As he sat down, Kang Seo smilingly remarked that he felt like he was on a horse. Yu Suntae agreed, saying that it felt like that. However, when he started the engine, he said that was the end of the similarity because the motorcycle was 100 times faster. He gave the throttle sharply and shouted for Kang Seo to hold on tight because they were about to pick up speed. After a while, he asked Kang Seo how he was feeling, if he was feeling sick or seasick. Kang Seo, a little wary, asked if couriers were really required to travel on such devices. Yu Suntae smiled when he heard the question and asked if he was scared, adding that if he was afraid of driving a motorcycle, he would not be a courier. He emphasized that there was no other transportation that could move as fast in narrow alleys. Kang Seo clarified whether the main purpose was fast food delivery. He noted to himself that the speed of the motorcycle is not as impressive as expected, and the noise of the engine is only disturbing. Kang Seo is confident that he can move faster with body-lightening techniques. When they reached a residential area, they stopped and Yu Suntae offered to walk around, explaining that most of their clients live in this particular apartment complex. He said that this complex was called Azure and pointed out the building numbers, explaining that the first digit in an apartment number showed what floor it was on. Kang Seo questioned that if this city was really as dangerous as he had said earlier and teeming with monsters, why hadn't people left it yet? Yu Suntae explained that although it was dangerous here, it wasn't to the point of forcing the residents to abandon their homes. He said that about 25 years ago, when the first monsters appeared, life in this city had indeed become impossible. But people soon realized that with magic stones, they could create protective barriers around cities, so it was safe here. Kang Seo asked what the magic stones were, and Yu Suntae, surprised, interjected, hadn't he already told them about it? He explained that they were something like nuggets that people find in the bodies of slain monsters. They contained so much energy that they began to replace the energy carriers of the past. Thanks to them, there was a leap in the development of science. He added that this did not mean that the streets were now completely safe, but that one should always be on guard. Yu Suntae took out a can of Coke, smiled, and suggested that they pause on their journey, asking if he wanted to drink something refreshing. Kang Seo noted with slight wariness that the item made a strange noise. What was that sound? Yu Suntae laughed and said that he should try the drink after all. He was sure that he had never tasted such a thing before. Holding the jar in his hands, Kang Seo thought he was facing something new again and felt apprehensive, but he remembered how with the first piece of jjajangmyeon he was also cautious at first. He took a cautious sip of the cola and immediately wondered what the flavor was. His eyes widened for a moment as a slight tingle ran through his entire body. He mentally noted that this spicy sweetness was refreshing and like an epiphany that came to a person like a lightning strike after long and hard work. Clutching the jar in his hand, he shrieked in surprise, noting that this was a strange drink. It couldn't even be compared to the magic panacea that the elders of the Northern Ice Palace had given him. Yu Suntae laughed and asked, "Well, were you surprised?" He added that besides tasting good, cola also helps with indigestion. Kang Seo exclaimed that it was unbelievable. Yu Suntae headed to the motorcycle and said that they had rested now, so it was time to head back. Kang Seo asked if it was really necessary to ride this device. Couldn't they do without the motorcycle? Yu Suntae said that of course there are other modes of transportation, but there's nothing good about a motorcycle for a courier. Kang Seo said with confidence that he could manage on foot without a vehicle. Yu Suntae reminded him that the delivery must be fast, Otherwise, the noodles would swell on the way, lose their marketability, and the customers would get annoyed if the courier was slow. Kang Seo calmly stated that there was no need to worry about that, as he was faster than a motorcycle on his two. Yu Sun-tai exclaimed, "How is that possible?" He thought for a moment and admitted to himself that it might not be that unbelievable. After all, Kang Seo appeared to be at least A-class level. Kang Seo suggested, "Let Yu Sun-tai see for himself on the way back." He was willing to give a demonstration of his capabilities. Yu Sun-tai agreed, got on his motorcycle and asked if Kang Seo remembered the way back to the restaurant. He added that of course he believed him, but it was worth checking just in case. "Let Kang Seo run and he'll drive." Yu Sun-tae said he would start, and if he really overtook him, he would let him work as a courier without using transportation. He then pressed the gas and announced the start of the race. Kang Seo had gotten the nickname Flame Emperor for a reason, for the gift of controlling the element of fire that he possessed was rare and powerful. He had mastered an ancient technique known as the invisible body technique, which allowed him to become completely invisible. With this skill, Kang Seo could infiltrate an enemy undetected and deliver a deadly blow. But after achieving enlightenment, he continued to refine his invisibility and agility technique. He named the new and improved version of his skill the Invisible Void Body Technique. This ability didn't just make him visually invisible, it erased any signs of life around him. The combination of this technique and his high martial arts prowess had earned Kang Seo not only respect, but also the title of martial arts god. Half an hour had passed since Yu Sun-tae's departure before he reached the restaurant. Taking off his helmet, he thoughtfully said out loud, wondering where Kang Seo was lingering. He mentally admitted to himself that he was squeezing full speed out of the motorcycle, treating the ride as a competition. When Yu Sun-tae entered the restaurant, he was greatly surprised. Kang Seo was already there and nonchalantly informed him that he was late. Ha-yoon happily said that Daddy was late. Yu Sun-tae asked in surprise, "Did Kang Seo really run in early?" Lim Soo-young laughed and reported that he arrived about 10 minutes ago. Yu Sun-tae said that, as promised, he was now allowing him to work as a courier without using transportation. He added that the superpower test still needed to be taken because he himself was wondering what level of strength he had. Kang Seo replied that he agreed to take the test. The next day, they arrived at the main building of the testing center in the morning. Yu Sun-tae was relieved that they had finally arrived. Kang Seo looked around and noticed that there were a lot of people gathered here. A girl appeared at the reception desk and asked him to fill out a form, and Kang Seo noted with quiet annoyance that he didn't have any documents or residence registration and asked what to write. Yu Sun-tae suggested putting Kang's last name and the address of their restaurant in the residence section. Yu Sun-tae thought that he felt the weight of pushing the paper once again, but he was determined to finish the paperwork because he was their salvation. After completing the paperwork, Kang Seo asked about the test itself. Yu Sun-tae explained that during the test, they would need to place their hands on two balls slightly larger than a fist. There would be an electric current between them, and the better Kang Seo could withstand it, the higher his level would be. He also mentioned that complete control over one's own energy determines the level of an awakened person. Kang Seo asked if it was good to have a high grade. Yu Sun-tae replied that it would improve his life. He added that some especially gifted ones are valued as national treasures. In any case, high class ensures a long and trouble-free existence. Kang Seo thought that many people in his place would be jumping for joy by now, but he knew that wealth and fame are decay and dust. Man has many passions and desires, and they are always insatiable. No matter how hard he tries, and a lifetime is not enough to satisfy them. He remembered how he had gone into the wilderness of mountain villages because he was tired of the world of passions. Kang Seo realized that now he would have to diligently hide his level to live in peace. He said he would go, whereupon Yu Sun-tae waved at him and wished him good luck. Kang Seo stopped and asked which office the testing would take place in. Taking the elevator to the second floor, he noted to himself that the self-opening door looked almost magical to him. He stepped out of the elevator and was greeted by a man who introduced himself as Park Soo-eun, the head of the second department, and said he would take the test from him. Kang Seo shook his hand and said he was glad to meet him. Park Soo replied that it was mutual and noted that it had been a long time since isolationists had been tested. A surprised Kang Seo asked if that was really the case. Park Soo said that 10 years ago their numbers spiked, but then the government took back control and cases became rare. He added that there were no chances in the north before, and even now. Kang Seo didn't understand his words and wondered which north he was talking about. Park Soo led him inside, explained that the procedure depended on the class he received, and promised that Kang Seo would be sent to the right training. After saying that, he pointed the way through the automatic door. Once inside, Park Soo said that he brought the test taker. His name was Kang Seo. The girl said that they will start the test now. She asked him to put his hands on the special spheres and not to move until the test was completed. Kang Seo calmly complied with the instruction, and as soon as the procedure started, he thought he didn't feel any electric shock because his body was calmly resisting. He remembered that Sun Tae had said that the stronger his resistance, the higher the level would register. Kang Seo concluded that he should restrain his internal energy. A few minutes passed, and the girl reported that the test was successfully completed and he could remove his hands. She looked at the screen, and after shifting her gaze to Kang Seo, she said that his test result showed a level F. Kang Seo asked what did that mean. The girl explained that F grade meant that an awakened one had an ability slightly above human, while normal humans were categorized as G grade. Su Eun, looking at the result, thought that Kang Seo probably expected a higher rank, and was probably feeling disappointed right now. Kang Seo thought that he made a mistake. He was trying to lower the resistance to get a G level. He should have lowered the resistance to 0 right away. Su Eun, crying, told him not to get frustrated because his level doesn't determine his value. Kang Seo wondered why he was so worried. The Korean Awakened Association, part of the internal security structure, is the support department for the awakened and deals with matters of high importance and deep secrecy. Each task force has its own unique number. The first group deals with the most classified operations, followed in descending order by the others. The chief of the second group is responsible for the training of isolationists, a very responsible position. Because among the isolationists, there are often awakened people of higher classes. So, even if it prevents them from doing their main job, they must organize the training of isolationists. Baek Eun-ho entered the office and asked Park Soo-eun if he was tired of recycling again. Soo-eun smiled and said that it was his elite colleague Baek Eun-ho, and asked what brought such a busy first group supervisor to him. Baek Eun-ho calmly replied that he had heard about the order to start the isolationist training and came to ask if he would like to share a night meal with him. He inquired and asked, speaking of his direct duty, "How did the testing go?" Soo-eun sighed and replied that this isolationist was the first in many years. The leadership had not commented on the results yet, but his silence spoke of dissatisfaction. Upon hearing that the rookie received a grade of F, Baek Eun-ho expressed regret. Soo-eun confirmed that because of the isolation he experienced, this guy would have problems. It would be better to end up in a high grade like this. He then smiled and added that he wouldn't mind starving the worm with kimbap or something. Baek Eun-ho asked irritably that did his friend really think he came in the middle of the night to eat cold kimbap from the supermarket? Only fresh jjajangmyeon and gabaju are worthy of a real dinner. Soo-eun, a little embarrassed, remarked that they just needed something to eat. But Baek Eun-ho seriously said that one should never underestimate the value of gourmet food. In the morning, Kang Seo woke up, noting that his spring pavilion companions were already up. It was 5:50. Kang Seo thought it was strange that he hadn't gotten much sleep, though he speculated that perhaps the reason was because he had learned a lot yesterday. Thinking back on yesterday, he noted that there had been some nice moments, such as after the day's lessons, he had tasted a roll for the first time. Even jjajangmyeon didn't excite him like that, and he was sure that he had tasted everything possible in his previous life. However, his fatigue demanded his attention. Kang Seo decided to engage in chi breathing practice, but he quickly realized that it could be dangerous in the association building, as there were too many awakened ones with a keen sense of aura. He remembered the woman almost recognizing him the day before. She had almost caught his true level. The association building is full of awakened ones of different classes, and among them might even be those with much greater flair than that woman. He wondered why his training was taken so seriously. Perhaps it was because the training was much deeper and more useful than he had expected. Yesterday, the instructor told of an important event, that a C-class portal had suddenly opened, from which many monsters had rushed in. Both civilians and awakened ones were affected. This incident is called the Great Clash. Humanity managed to defeat the monsters, But the battle site became a dead zone called the Land of Death, uninhabitable. Even criminals avoided this region. Kang Seo realized that when he came out of the portal, it was in the Land of Death that he entered, and only then did he find the city. He thought that if 2 or 3 more portals of this class opened there, the association wouldn't be able to cope. There would be a disaster. Yesterday, Kang Seo had learned about the structure of society in this country. It seemed to him like a tower made of parts that didn't fit together well. Even the slightest shock could bring it down. And so, in this fragile world, he emerges as a martial artist of the highest caliber. He has come to the conclusion that a quiet and inconspicuous life is almost impossible for him. And even though it sounds selfish, he was willing to do anything just to keep the secret of his true class and live the rest of his life in peace. Suddenly, he sensed an approach. Someone with surprisingly pure energy was approaching the door. It was Park Soo-eun. He knocked and asked if Kang Seo was awake. After receiving an affirmative answer, he entered. Kang Seo looked at him and noticed that he looked very tired and exhausted. Kang Seo, with a smile of politeness, offered him the coffee he had just brewed. Park Soo-eun was pleasantly surprised, after all. He had only learned how to do this yesterday and was already practicing it today. Kang Seo filled the coffee with his energy and said that it was all thanks to his training, adding that drinking it would make him feel better. After taking a sip, he exclaimed that the drink woke him up as if he had really slept well. Kang Seo thought that he was putting his soul into his training, so this was his way of expressing his gratitude. He asked his mentor what the topic would be today. Soo-eun replied with a smile that the first class would be the canteen. Kang Seo responded with interest, and Soo-eun explained that he had specifically asked for a special menu to be prepared today. Once in the dining hall, Soo-eun noted that it was crowded in the morning. Kang Seo replied that it reminded him of the field kitchen on military trips. Soo-eun laughed and said that the work is somewhat like a war, only the food is in large quantities. He offered to put as much food on the tray as he wanted. Kang Seo worriedly asked if there would be enough food for the latecomers. Soo-eun praised him for his attentiveness and assured him that if they ran out, the canteen staff would prepare more. Kang Seo was astonished, as this all seemed unbelievable to him. Soo-eun explained that they were living in an era of abundance after the wars. Kang Seo agreed, adding that it wasn't the abundance that amazed him the most, but the logistics and storage technology. Soo-eun thought that this young man has a strategic mindset, even though yesterday was his first day. He said that thanks to the scientists, they always have a choice of food. For the employees, the canteen is a place of rest and recuperation. Kang Seo added with a smile that eating is the most enjoyable part of the day. Soo-eun admitted that he rarely comes here and usually eats a quick meal. When they had already eaten, he asked if they liked the food. Kang Seo thanked him sincerely and said that he really enjoyed it. Soo-eun said that was enough for today. He gave a complete tour of the dining room. Kang Seo asked in surprise if there would be no more classes. Soo-eun replied that there was supposed to be a tour of the gym on the schedule, but it wasn't necessary for their class. He added that being an E-class wasn't so bad because there was less responsibility. Soo-eun mentally scolded himself and thought that his conscience would be killing him because he was cutting classes because of his own busyness and deceiving an innocent boy who didn't understand anything yet. When the elevator opened, Soo-eun pointed to the room and said that this was the gym. He explained that anyone awakened with an ID could train here, regardless of their class. Soo-eun remarked that if Kang Seo still wished to train in this gym, it would be very commendable and even beneficial. Kang Seo instantly responded with a refusal. Soo-eun reminded him that the classes were free and added that he could explain in detail why the gym would be useful to him. Kang Seo thanked him for his concern and sincere effort, but admitted that he doubted the gym would ever be useful to him. Soo-eun hesitated for a moment and suddenly asked what his plans were for the future. After a while, Kang Seo came downstairs and noticed how he was already being greeted by waving his hand. He expressed his gratitude for coming out to greet him. Yu Sun-tae replied with a smile, saying that there was no need for thanks, then asked a question about the class. Kang Seo, without hiding, produced his hunter's license and calmly informed that his class was F. Lim So-yoon worriedly reminded him that he wanted to get a G class, after all, as a very ordinary person. Kang Seo explained that he hadn't been able to contain his inner energy in time, and because of that, he'd gotten a higher grade than he'd expected. Yu Sun-tae assured him that there was nothing wrong with that, as his ability was too obvious, and an ordinary person would not be able to do such a thing. It would definitely attract attention. Kang Seo anxiously asked if he was really that suspicious. Yu Sun-tai said that to be blunt, yes. Baek Eun-ho, watching, asked if he noticed anything unusual about Kang Seo. Soo-eun calmly replied that the first thing to note was his outstanding intelligence and high learning ability. He added that Kang Seo was very smart, and if a concept was explained to him, he immediately understood how to apply it in different areas. He quickly and easily put what he learned into practice. Baek Eun-ho was surprised to hear that this was true. He added that the members of law enforcement department of the first group reported something curious. According to them, Kang Seo's movements and sense of balance are completely out of his class. They even began to suspect if the apparatus was broken. Soo-eun recalled that after the test was completed, the apparatus was tested again and showed no malfunctions. He was confident that the class had been determined fairly. He added that anyone could develop and grow to the next level, but he was unlikely to reach a middle class, much less a high class. Perhaps the reason he was getting so much attention was because there hadn't been any new isolationists for a long time. Baek Eun-ho admitted that he expected much more from him and can't hide his disappointment. He asked what Kang Seo's future plans were. Soo-eun, recalling their previous conversation, revealed that Kang Seo had expressed his intention to help his friend in the restaurant business. At this time, at the restaurant, Yu Sun-tai handed Kang Seo a new cell phone. He said that with this device, he would be able to contact him at any time. Kang Seo thanked him. But Yu Sun-tai said that there was no need to thank him, because he had purchased the gadget with Kang Seo's allowance as an isolationist. He then asked if the man wanted anything else. Seo-yoon supported her husband with a warm smile, adding that maybe Kang Seo has some special requests. Kang Seo said he was thinking about getting a haircut. He noticed that most of the men in their society preferred short hairstyles and he didn't want to stand out too much. Seo-yoon got excited and asked what kind of haircut he wanted and added that any short hair would be fine. She turned to her husband and asked his opinion. Yu Sun-tai supported her and said that Kang Seo could really go with any haircut. Then he remembered that he still had to chop the ingredients for tomorrow. He mentally sighed, thinking that once his wife gets into talking about fashion, there's nothing to stop it. But at the same time, he had faith in Kang Seo and was confident that he could handle it. Seo-yoon, excited by the idea, suggested that Kang Seo come with her and she would take him to a good hairdresser. An hour later, Yu Sun-tai looked at the new Kang Seo and confessed that he knew he was handsome, but now he was so dressed up that he was noticeable from a mile away. Yu Sun-tai thought about the strange feeling that the whole street was staring at Kang Seo. Passers-by exclaimed in wonder at his appearance and said who this man was. If he was an actor, he had a model-like appearance. Suddenly, a girl came up to him and asked if she could get his autograph and take a photo. A second girl added that she would like to have one too. Yu Sun-tae hurriedly intervened, explaining that Kang Seo is not a star, but just an ordinary guy. There's no need for autographs. The girl, embarrassed, confessed that she just couldn't believe that such a handsome man wasn't an actor. Yu Sun-tae muttered that he thought these girls were crazy. Kang Seo asked why he couldn't take a picture with them and why she wanted his autograph. Yu Sun-tae explained that Kang Seo was too handsome, so people mistook him for a celebrity. If you let them take a picture, they'll put it on the internet. And if those photos go viral, he'll start getting recognized on the streets, and all of this will only lead to trouble. He added that this wasn't the life Kang Seo wanted. Kang Seo agreed in thought, deciding that he really should be careful not to stand out in public. The next day, he worked quickly at the restaurant and confidently took orders from customers. He carefully placed 2 servings of jjajangmyeon on the table and wished them a pleasant appetite. The girls blushed embarrassedly and thanked him. He went to another table and asked if they had made up their minds. Not hearing an answer, he politely apologized. One of the girls, blushing, apologized and hurriedly ordered 2 jjajangmyeon and seafood udon. Kang Seo confirmed the order and loudly voiced it. Yu Sun-tae nodded and said that the order was accepted. A voice came from another table saying that they would like gabahu. Another table seconded the request. Kang Seo voiced the gabaju order for tables 1 and 3 accepted. One of the girls, after tasting the dish, exclaimed enthusiastically that the cuisine here was amazing. Another added that she wouldn't mind coming here every day. Another said she would like to eat jjajangmyeon here every day. Seo-yoon saw another customer off and thanked him with a smile and invited him to come again. At that moment, the door of the restaurant opened and the girl asked if there were any seats available. Seo Yoon apologetically informed her that they had a full load. The girl sighed disappointedly, but immediately said with determination that she would wait. Seo Yoon warned that the kitchen was almost out of food, so it would be wise to come back tomorrow. The girls looked at her pleadingly and asked if they couldn't eat at their place at all. Meanwhile, another girl made her way through the crowd and loudly asked everyone to let her through. As she made her way through the crowd, she introduced herself as Kim Ji-eun and said that her name was Kim Ji-eun and she was here for an interview. So Young smiled politely and pronounced that she was very happy to see a volunteer for the job. Kim Ji revealed that she was 23 years old, a college graduate, and was currently looking for a job in her major. So Young said that the restaurant has recently become short of manpower, so they decided to hire another employee. She added that Kim Ji responded to the ad so quickly that she was already hired. Kim Ji excitedly admitted that Spring Pavilion restaurant is very famous and she sincerely wants to work here. So Young laughed and said that the restaurant isn't that famous at all. Kim Ji replied that it's not, because that beautiful oppa attracts the entire female population. Following Soyeon's lead, Kim Ji asked where she should start. Kang Seo noted to himself that this girl seemed quite interesting and had a very strong aura. He thought that in this civilization, people with high superpowers clearly lived better than ordinary people, and they must have a different quality of life. So Young asked her to take care of packing portions of pickled radish for now, as well as taking and delivering orders. Kim Ji nodded and said she understood. Soo Young handed a long list to Kang Seo and asked him to deliver the orders in order. He said he understood and promised to come back soon. After putting on his helmet and taking the orders with him, he said he was leaving for the delivery. Yu Sun-tae asked Kim Ji to help him with packing the portions. The TA, smiling, said that of course she would help. She remarked aloud that it was strange because she had read reviews about this place, and it said that there were very few customers. Suddenly, Kang Seo appeared and asked if she was busy. Kim Ji was surprised and asked if he had delivered the orders. Kang Seo calmly replied that the addresses were very close by, literally a stone's throw away from the restaurant. Yu So-young set the box down and said that everything was ready. You can pick up the jjajangmyeon and jampong already packed. Kang Seo took the box and said he went. Kim Ji waved his hand and wished him to be careful. After a while, the restaurant was closed and it rained heavily outside. Kang Seo returned to the restaurant and said that he had finished everything. Yu Sun-tae, still peeling onions, praised him and offered him a seat, noting that he had finished just in time for lunch. Kang Seo, coming closer, asked if they were already preparing for the evening load-in. So Young replied that they were, and remarked that it was already time to pick Ha-yoon up from daycare. Kim Ji asked in surprise if they had a daughter. So Young, smiling, replied that yes, the girl was already 5 years old. She asked Kang Seo to pick up Ha-yoon from daycare, because there was an evening load ahead and they were struggling to get the groceries ready in time. Kang Seo agreed and said he would be back soon. Kim Ji, full of enthusiasm, said she wanted to meet Ha-yoon too, and offered to go with Kang Seo. Yu Sun-tae, winking at his wife, approved of her impulse and said that the two of them would be fine here. Kang Seo and Kim Ji took their umbrellas and said they'd be back soon and hurried to the garden. On the way, Kim Ji asked if he already knew her name and reminded him that she was Kim Ji-eun, 23 years old. She then addressed him by calling him Oppa and asked if she could call him that. Kang Seo replied that he was 35, but she could call him whatever she felt comfortable calling him. To which Kim Ji exclaimed in surprise that he doesn't look his age at all. Kang Seo said that for some reason a lot of people say that to him. He then apologized for the indiscreet question and asked why she decided to work at the Spring Pavilion. After all, with her abilities, she could have chosen a better job than this one. Kim Ji was confused and asked what other abilities she had. She assured her that she didn't have any special skills at all. She hurriedly clarified that she didn't want him to think that she had some hidden agenda, but she just wanted to see him. Realizing that she had said too much, Kim Ji tried to change the subject and pointed forward and noticed someone standing in the doorway. She asked if it was Ha-yoon. At that moment, the girl shrieked with joy as she recognized Kang Seo and called out to him. The teacher smilingly reminded Ha-yoon to say hello, to which she loudly said, "Hello, uncle." Walking over, Kang Seo asked if she had a good time. Ha-yoon nodded and turned to the teacher, saying it was her uncle. The teacher smiled and said that Ha-yoon had told her a lot about him, and she wondered who he was, Ha-Yoon's wonderful uncle. Then she suddenly froze and blushed slightly. Kang-so anxiously asked if she was okay. The teacher apologized and, transferring her gaze to the girl standing next to her, said that she must be this gentleman's spouse. Suddenly, there was recognition in the teacher's voice, and she said that it was Ji-eun. Then she asked in surprise how she had gotten here. Kim-ji quickly walked over to her and covered her mouth with the palm of her hand and asked her, "Since when did she work here?" Sora, equally surprised, asked in response how her job in the guild was. Kim-ji, signaling for her to keep quiet, gestured for her not to continue. She quietly explained that Ha-Yoon's parents thought she was an ordinary person and that she was now on assignment. With a pleading tone in her voice, she asked Sora to pretend she didn't know her. Sora nodded and said she understood. Then, waving her hand, she said goodbye to the girl. Ha-Yoon cheerfully replied, "Goodbye, teacher." Kang-seo politely said that they were leaving and said goodbye. The teacher, a little embarrassed, wished them goodbye. As they walked away, Kang-so asked if that kindergarten teacher was really her friend. Kim-ji, not expecting the question, laughed and nervously said that yes, they were friends. Kang-seo noticed that they knew each other and wondered why she hadn't talked to her. Kim-ji laughed and said that they already see each other too much. Then, wanting to change the subject, remarked that walking under an umbrella in the rain is nice, and asked Ha-Yoon if that was the case. The girl cheerfully replied that yes, and then asked that beautiful Nuna also likes to walk in the rain. Kim-ji, laughing, said that she likes walking with her uncle more. Ha-Yoon laughed and said that she likes her umbrella because it has ducklings on it. Kang-seo asked with concern if it was heavy for her to carry the umbrella. Ha-Yoon smilingly replied that it wasn't hard at all and she could do it by herself. Kang-seo nodded and said that if she still needed help, she could tell him. As they passed by an alley, Ha-Yoon suddenly stopped, pointed forward, and exclaimed that there was someone there. She then ran and turned behind a garbage can and shouted that there it was. "Look, uncle, it's squeaking!" Kang-seo picked the creature up in his arms and wondered if it was a mouse and why it was getting wet in the rain. Kim-ji took a close look and said that it wasn't just a mouse, but a special kind of rodent called a dungeon rat. Kang-seo asked if the dungeon rat in front of them was really a dungeon rat, and clarified if the creature was a magical animal. Kim-ji explained that it dwells in dungeons, but it is not considered a magical beast. Unlike magical beasts, it has no aggression towards humans and does not try to harm them. Due to their keen sense of magic enemies and monsters, as well as their cute appearance, these creatures have become a favorite among hunters. Many tame them and keep them at home. She added that the rat seemed to have fallen through the portal with its master and survived the disaster. Being injured, it somehow managed to escape outside. Ha-Yoon admitted with concern in her voice that she didn't want the animal to die and asked if it was possible to cure it. Kang-seo doubtfully said that it would be very difficult since the animal was barely breathing. Ha-Yoon sobbed and said that since it was still breathing and alive, it couldn't be abandoned. Kang-seo realized how blind he was. He said that she would still die even though she was still breathing. After much doubt, he decided that all life is definitely valuable. If he turned his back on that life, he would be no different from the cold-blooded killer he had once been. He nodded to the girl and said with confidence in his voice that they were taking the rat with them. Kim-ji cheerfully supported the decision and told Ha-Yoon that they needed to get to the restaurant as soon as possible and try to save her. Kang-seo said that the animal's condition is critical. It's barely breathing, and if they don't hurry, it might be too late. Ha-Yoon fearfully asked what they should do. Gathering energy in his palms, Kang-seo thought that the rat's breathing and heartbeat were barely perceptible. Perhaps he could breathe life into it. Kim-ji, watching his action, whispered his name with disbelief in her voice. A few minutes later, they ran into the restaurant. Ha-Yoon, crying, ran up to her parents, exclaiming that they needed help. So-young rushed anxiously to her daughter and asked why she was crying. Ha-Yoon begged to help the animal. Yu Sun-tae, noticing the rat, was surprised and asked where they found it. Kang-seo replied that he found it in an alley. Yu Sun-tae examined it closely and said that she was apparently attacked in the portal. She looks exhausted and scarred. Ha-Yoon stated that she would heal her and keep her. So-yoon gently explained to her daughter that this isn't an ordinary pet, it's a dungeon rat. If they found it outside the portal, it probably has an owner looking for it. You can't just take it for yourself without trying to find out who it belongs to. Kang-seo added that they should try to cure the beast first. Yu Suntai agreed and suggested finding the nearest veterinary clinic. Beck and his companion entered the restaurant, greeted everyone, and wished peace to the house. Yu Suntai greeted him cordially and invited him to sit down. Beck, noticing the rat, came closer and asked if it was really a dungeon rat. Yu Suntai confirmed and explained that his daughter had found it. The animal was severely injured. Beck took a close look at the animal and agreed that the injuries were serious. His companion, Myung-jin, asked permission to examine it. Taking the rat in his hands, he observed that it had already been given first aid quite professionally and was in better condition than it appeared at first glance. He added that he would use his energy to finally bring it out of its critical condition. Kang Seo, watching the stranger's actions, thought that this man had truly gifted hands. He could feel him gathering energy from the environment and turning it into a healing power. Without a doubt, he was a healer. When the rat in his hands started squeaking, Beck proudly introduced him as one of the famous healers. Ha-yoon happily exclaimed that he was a miracle and thanked him for his help. Myung-jin asked with a smile if she really thought so. The girl nodded affirmatively. Kang Seo looked at all of this and thought about how great the power of the awakened ones was. Their abilities were truly astounding. Later, Yu Suntai approached his daughter and asked what she was doing. The girl replied that she was watching a rat that seemed to be on the mend. Seeing the rat move, Ha-yoon exclaimed that it had come to life. Yu Suntai agreed and suggested that the rat was hungry and offered it milk. He affectionately reminded his daughter that it was time for her to eat too, and suggested she wash her hands before eating. After drinking, the rat suddenly began to squeak vigorously. Yu Suntai asked what was happening to it. Kang Seo entered the room, surprised to see that it looked like she was trying to tell him something. Yu Suntai asked what was wrong with her. Kang Seo replied that it was like the beast was leading him somewhere. Perhaps it wants to show him something. The rat squeaked impatiently and shook its head. Yu Suntai noted that it was a very intelligent creature. Perhaps something really had happened, and the owner was in trouble. He asked Kang Seo that since he was the fastest of them all, maybe he could check what happened there. Yu Suntai added that it was not a good idea to ignore the beast's request, because Ha-yoon would be very upset. The girl's eyes lit up with hope and she looked at her uncle pleadingly. Kang Seo firmly agreed and said he would do it for Ha-yoon's sake. He added that he too felt something strange about the beast because he felt an unusual energy. Yu Suntai didn't understand what he meant. Kang Seo explained that he had encountered such energy before, but he couldn't determine what it was yet. Kang Seo leaned over and offered to show the rat the way. The rat squeaked in approval. He said goodbye and promised to return. Yu Suntae and Ha-yoon wished him luck and told him to be careful. Jumping on the roofs of buildings, Kang Seo asked the animal if he was going the right way. The rat squeaked again in confirmation. When he stopped at the portal, he froze. He anxiously said that this portal was similar to the one from which he himself had once entered this world. Meanwhile, inside the portal, a fierce life-and-death struggle was going on. One of the men chopping the monster exclaimed in despair that this was the place where he was destined to die. Another noticed that there were too many enemies, and only 4 of the team were left alive. A tired girl with a trembling voice admitted that she would soon use up all her strength and would no longer be able to maintain the protective barrier. The man next to her said doomfully that it was indeed the end, and added that he was glad to have worked with them and thanked them for everything, offering to throw a party in the other world. The other, grinning, replied that he had had enough of this company in his present life. The girl tearfully whispered that only a hunter of rank could save them, but that was a pipe dream. She bitterly remarked that if only she were a rank higher. Suddenly, a piercing squeak sounded in the air, and at the same instant, a powerful blow rang out, shattering the monsters. The girl, creating a magical light, turned around, and one of the men said in amazement that the enemies were dead. The other shouted with disbelief that it was impossible. One of them asked in a daze what had happened, because just a moment ago they had been surrounded. The girl listened to the sounds and asked if they had heard the korong squeaking. Meanwhile, Kang Seo was moving through the dungeon at an incredible speed, killing the remaining monsters. He thought that he hadn't destroyed all of them last time. The smaller monsters had survived and the portal hadn't closed, but this time he promised himself to see it through. At this time, the monster behind him had recovered and was preparing to attack. Kang Seo, sensing the danger, turned around and reacted quickly to hit the skull with his energy. He noticed that their core was in the head, which meant that was where he should strike. Noticing the sword on the floor, He realized that someone had already been killed and decided to use it. Promising to avenge its owner and mentally wishing him peace, he cut through dozens of creatures on his way and soon found himself in front of a massive door. He sensed that this was where the demonic energy was emanating from, and upon opening it, he was confronted by an intimidating monster. The monster demanded with rage in his voice to know who he was and how dare he disturb his peace. He threatened that he would never forgive anyone for such a thing. Rushing forward with his sword, he declared that people like him should be killed without hesitation. Kang Seo, dodging his blows, noted that the knight holding his own head in his hands was a very unique appearance. The monster, infuriated by his calmness, shouted that the lowly man would pay for his mockery. Gathering a huge amount of strength in his weapon, he declared that he would destroy Kang Seo with a single blow. However, the man easily dodged, and in response he asked if his head was his vulnerable spot. The monster froze when he heard those words, and then jumped back, calling him an insolent worm with disdain. Kang Seo struck again, hitting the enemy in the chest. In an instant, the monster disappeared, leaving behind a magic crystal. Kang Seo picked it up and assumed that it was the source of the energy, and it was probably the magic stone. A rat crawled out of his pocket and settled on his shoulder. He said that he had eliminated everything that was a threat. Kang Seo added that the portal would close soon, suggesting that it return to its master. He gently lowered the animal to the ground, wishing it to find its master and take care of itself. The little rat immediately hurried away, searching for its owners. Kang Seo, watching him, thought Ha-Yun would be upset. Meanwhile, one of the men noticed that this dungeon was categorized as C-class for some reason. Another confirmed, adding that he didn't understand how a B-class monster could be here. One of them admitted that he still couldn't figure out what exactly saved them, and suggested that it was a C-class hunter. Another said that he had seen hunters of this rank. They exuded incredible power, and if one of them showed up here, they would definitely feel it. Someone suggested that perhaps they were saved by a zero-grade awakened one that was only rumored. The girl suddenly heard a familiar squeaking sound from afar, and pronounced that it was definitely a korong. The man cheerfully confirmed that the critter had survived, and another noticed her looking around and asked if she was looking for someone. The girl, looking at the rat's behavior, tearfully said that she was looking for Seok-hoon. The man looked down at the body of his fallen friend and said that he was sadly dead. The rat immediately ran up to its master's body and began to squeak and tug it hopefully. Suddenly, the walls of the cave began to shake. One of the fighters announced that the portal was empty and would soon close. He commanded to gather the magic stones immediately and scheduled a meeting at the exit in 20 minutes. The entire team immediately began to carry out the command. Outside, someone shouted that a special operations team was coming out and urgently demanded a stretcher. A reporter who introduced himself as Hwang Ji-soo from the hunting news broadcast live and asked how many people had died. Meanwhile, Korongi, struggling to stay on her feet, turned the nearest corner and cried. At this time, Yu Sun-tae tried to comfort his daughter and pronounced that the rat had returned to its master, and this was better for it. However, Ha-Yun wiped the tears from her cheeks and sadly said that she was still sad because she would never see her again. When Kang Seo entered the house, he immediately noticed the dejected mood and wondered why their Ha-Yun looked like someone had died. Yu Sun-tae explained that the girl never got to say goodbye to that little rat from the dungeon. When the Korongi came out of his pocket and squeaked, Kang Seo teasingly asked which rat he was talking about. Ha-Yun, hearing his voice, exclaimed happily, rushing over to him with a hug. Kang Seo said that the rat's name was Korongi. He then explained that her master had taken her with him on a monster mopping mission, and as a result, both were seriously hurt. Yu Sun-tae asked what had become of that hunter. Kang Seo lowered his gaze and calmly said that he found him already dead, and there was nothing that could be done. It had been a long time since his death. Yu Sun-tae asked in surprise if Kang Seo had really gone to the dungeon. Kang Seo said that was exactly what he had done. Yu Sun-tae noted that the portal would probably be officially cleared soon, but Kang Seo calmly said that he had already cleared it, and it had closed. At this moment, a thought flashed through Yu Sun-tae's mind. What rank did Kang Seo really have? Could it really be grade A or even C like legendary hunter Li Xin? He remembered how he used to work as a loader and observe the hunters up close. Among them, there wasn't a single one who could single-handedly sweep the portal besides Li Xin. However, Kang Seo's aura is different. He doesn't emit a powerful aura, But if he hides his aura so well, then perhaps the zero-grade awakened that everyone is talking about is in front of him. Meanwhile, Ha-Yun carefully tied a bow on Korongi and cheerfully exclaimed that the rat now looked just like a real princess. Yusuntai thought with a smile as to why he was even bothering in the first place. Even if Kang Xiu is the mysterious awakened one, he is still his friend. Is there anything wrong with that? He decided to let those thoughts go and focus on the good things. Ha-Yun, Yu Suntai, and Kang Xiu eventually decided to keep the dungeon rat, for which they received a stern reprimand from Xiu Yun. The next day, Kang Xiu woke up and looked at the calendar and reminded himself that today was a day off. He began to ponder what he could do to practice or perhaps find a job for a couple hours. The words of a girl who had reproached him for working all the time and not being able to rest at all came to his mind. She had then said that he should just do things that brought him joy, because it was stupid to work on days when he should be resting. Kang Xiu thought that she would probably say the same thing to him now. He decided that it might be worth it to look at his trophy. Kang Xiu suddenly felt a strange alien energy emanating from the magic stone. The people in this world use this energy. Their energy was similar to the dark magic used by the heavenly demon cult. This magic was forbidden in the magic community, because its source was often human sacrifice. He decided that he couldn't keep this dangerous artifact, but he would seal its energy for now. As he left his room, he heard Yu Suntai surprisingly remark that he was up early today. Kang Xiu replied that the same could be said for Sun Tae himself, because even though it was his day off, he was still busy cutting something in the kitchen again. Yu Suntai laughed and admitted that as a chef, he had to be responsible at least in chopping the onions for tomorrow. Then he inquired about what he was going to do. Kang Xiu thoughtfully admitted that he hadn't decided yet. Sun Tae asked if he wanted to go to the library with Ha-Yun. Kang Xiu immediately agreed and took Ha-Yun with him to the central library. Once in the library, Kang Xiu looked around with interest and noticed that there were places where anyone could read valuable books in peace. Ha-Yun excitedly stated that she wanted to check out the books, and Kang Xiu gently asked her not to run around and come back as soon as she picked something out. He was pleasantly surprised at how conveniently organized everything was, and how many incredible amounts of books there were. Meanwhile, one of those library counselors, noticing that the girl couldn't reach the shelf, approached and asked if she needed help. Ha-Yun politely asked her uncle to get her one of the fairy tales, and the uncle wasted no time in handing her the book she needed, wishing her a pleasant reading experience. Kang Xiu watched them and immediately realized that the consultant was also an awakened one. He had quite a strong aura for his age. He wondered what could be going on in this guy's life, for despite his abilities, he was clearly having difficulties. This young man wasn't as strong as Ji-eun, but there was clearly potential hidden within him. Kang Xiu wondered why he was stuck in this insignificant position. Ha-Yun, noticing the sad expression on his face, anxiously asked if he was feeling bad. The young man was slightly embarrassed and asked if it was all written on his face. She nodded and added that her uncle was worried about him too. He asked in amazement, why would he be worried? But then he took a closer look and exclaimed that he recognized Kang Xiu because he was the delivery man from Spring Pavilion. Kang Xiu came closer and asked him how he knew about him. The consultant smilingly admitted that he is popular on social media. Women adore him, and he delivers everything lightning fast and on foot. He then curiously asked what class he belongs to. Kang Xiu soon replied that his class was F. The consultant was dumbfounded and couldn't believe his ears. After a while, he told his story, and Kang Xiu, after listening to the story, said with restraint that it all made sense now. So raids are only allowed at a certain age, and the young man has to earn a living somehow. The counselor confirmed this, adding that he takes any job he's given and also volunteers at the library to supplement his scholarship. Kang Xiu asked if there was no one among everyone who could help him with his abilities. The one sadly replied that his grade was C. Not too bad, but not too good either because no one would sponsor him. He then added that unlike Kang Xiu, he doesn't have any special abilities, and because of that, his mother lives in need. Kang Xiu said firmly that class doesn't solve everything in his life because he can always be promoted. Kang Xiu asked in amazement if that was really possible, since he thought that a grade increase was a myth. Kang Xiu calmly remarked that he hadn't even tried it. He had already given up before he even started trying, and asked defiantly that didn't he want to become stronger? The counselor eagerly admitted that he wants to, of course, but he just doesn't know how to do it. Kang Seo confidently said that he could teach him. The consultant couldn't believe his ears and asked if he was really saying that. Kang Seo confirmed it, but added that in exchange for his help, he would ask for one favor, to find information about one country. The consultant immediately agreed and asked which country he was talking about. Kang Seo said he was interested in the OK dynasty. The young man said he was hearing about it for the first time. It was probably a state in ancient China, but he promised that he would try to find all the information he could. Kang Seo was pondering at this time that if he really had traveled through time, information about the OK dynasty should have been preserved in historical sources. This would also explain why the magic of that era and the magic of the modern world were so similar despite having different names. The consultant, meanwhile, was quickly flipping through the lists of known eras and dynasties of Han, Yuan, Zhou, and the Autumn period, but he stopped and frowned. Kang Seo noticed his confusion and curiously inquired what had happened. The consultant confusedly said that he had looked through all the known ancient dynasties, but there was no such thing as the OK dynasty. Kang Seo pondered to himself that names like Song, Ming were close in sound to those used in his civilization, and yet he had never heard of them before. Did this mean that among the kingdoms of the past, there was no period of the OK dynasty on this land? The counselor looked at him worriedly and wondered if something was wrong. Kang Seo replied that everything was fine. He was just a bit thoughtful. Then he thanked him and promised to invite him to the spring pavilion someday and treat him to some jjajangmyeon. The young man was embarrassed and said that it didn't cost him anything to help him. Kang Seo concluded that although he had not gotten the information he had hoped for, it was now clear to him that he had not traveled through time and the heavenly demon sect's mages had not bewitched him. But then, how did he end up in this world? In the evening, immersed in training, he concentrated on accumulating energy around him. An image of a man surfaced before his eyes. He said that in all likelihood it was a relic of his great-grandfather. Gently stroking little Kang Seo's head, he said that one day when the time came, he would have to find it, and then he could return home. Kang Seo blinked, warding off the vision, and whispered what this strange memory was. But he didn't feel anxious because he knew he would realize it sooner or later. At that moment, a suspicious noise outside the restaurant caught his attention. He cautiously approached and saw a man leaning over a motorcycle with a wrench in his hand. The man grinned grimly and said that he would loosen the nuts a little so that he would lose the desire to ride a motorcycle forever. Then he added that he wasn't doing it willingly because Sang-wook Hyungnim asked him to, so don't blame him. Kang Seo suddenly appeared behind his back and coldly asked who this Sang-wook was. The man abruptly turned around, shrieked in surprise, and asked who he was. Kang Seo nonchalantly asked him to keep his voice down at this time of the day. He shouldn't be shouting. The man repeated the question, demanding to know who he was. Kang Seo replied calmly, introducing himself as a courier from Spring Pavilion. Hearing this, the man said that it was clear he was the new courier. Then he said that Sang-wook Hyungnim was going to buy the restaurant, which meant that Kang Seo should start looking for another job. Kang Seo asked why he would do that. The man replied that Mr. Sang-wook is making good money in the area, and he is fed up with the success of Spring Pavilion. To this, Kang Seo said that was nonsense. The man instantly got angry and barked that the man had gotten quite insolent and apparently thought he was superior to others. He swung his hand and threateningly said that perhaps he should teach him a lesson. However, Kang Seo intercepted his hand as easily as if he were a child. The man was confused and thought with horror, where did this messenger get such inhuman strength? Kang Seo, squeezing his wrist tighter, said that it would be a good idea for the man himself to come to his senses. Then he swung around and hit him on the head, causing him to literally roll on the ground. Kang Seo ordered him to tell his stupid Hyungnim to stay away from the Spring Pavilion. Upon hearing this, the man, sensing danger, immediately ran away, shouting that he understood. The next day, the customer irritably asked why the asshole still hadn't called. He was told that maybe he was asleep. The man panted and came running and shouted that Dongman was back. He pointed with his hand and said, "Hyungnim, Sang-wook, look!" Sang-wook, frowning at the injured subordinate, asked what had happened to him. Then, raising his voice, he said that he had given him a chance and he had ruined everything. All he needed to do was loosen the nuts and he came back beaten like a dog. Don Man, on his knees, begged Hyungnim to listen to him. He told in a trembling voice that the new courier was an unusual man and a real monster. He threatened that they should stay away from the spring pavilion, or he wouldn't let it go. Sang-wook shouted that it was no wonder that such a fat, tubby man got punched in the face. Dong-man objected and said that it wasn't about his weakness at all, but that he was a real monster. Sang-wook admitted that perhaps the courier was strong. Then he smirked and suggested to go and deal with him together. He asked his men if it was time for them to stretch out a bit and typed a message and ordered them to gather everyone. They were going to see this courier. The next day, Kang Seo was delivering the order again. He put the boxes on the floor and said, "Here is their order," then inquired where he should pick up the dishes after the meal. One of the men grinned and mockingly said that he still didn't understand anything. The man added that it looked like he was going to have to do some fist work today, as it was rumored that this guy had beaten up Don Manu badly. He kicked the box with the order and said with a threatening tone in his voice that the new courier had upset their Hyungnim. Kang Seo squinted his eyes and asked a question directed at the familiar man, asking if he was the same Don Man. Don Man, trembling, spoke hurriedly, trying to justify that he had handed everything over as instructed. But Hyungnim, his companion, didn't let him finish. He grabbed Kang Seo by his clothes and growled, demanding that he stop muttering and remove that stupid helmet immediately. Kang Seo firmly intercepted the man's arm and warned him that weaklings like him shouldn't talk so arrogantly to those who were clearly stronger. The man cried out in pain, demanding to be released, but the grip only intensified. Kang Seo recalled that Dong-man had probably relayed his warning to them. Kang Seo squeezed his arm with even more force, causing his opponent to cry out in pain. A moment later, the man was on his knees, unable to break free. Kang Seo glumly stated that he would have to teach them a good lesson. Later, back at the restaurant, Kang Seo said, as if nothing had happened, that the order had been fulfilled. Yu Suntae said he was a little late and asked who had ordered so early in the morning, if it was the jocks. Kang Seo replied that it was nothing like that. It was just people who liked to eat. He added that the customers said they liked the food so much that they even washed the dishes themselves. Yu Suntae asked in surprise, "Did they even wash the plates? How shiny they were." Kang Seo said he wanted to ask a question. He asked if Yu Suntae knew a man named Gu Sang-wook and what he had to do with them. Yu Suntae asked how he even knew about that bastard, then said that Sang-wook used to be a courier at their establishment, but he was always slacking off and demanding a pay raise. Kang Seo nodded and shared that he had a conflict recently. One of the customers turned out to be an acquaintance of Sang-wook. He added that those people were behaving inappropriately, so he had to teach them a little lesson. Yu Suntae dropped his plate in amazement and thought that since Kang Seo was talking a little, it must have been about something much bigger. He remembered how just an hour ago, Kang Seo had been surrounded and attacked by a whole crowd of men. Kang Seo had only partially released his energy, and with a wave of his hand, he had directed it at the attackers. This power was so powerful and strong that everyone was instantly knocked down. Dong-man, trembling with his whole body, turned to his Hyungnim and, almost in a panic, reminded him that he had warned them if they went, they would definitely be in trouble. Kang Seo channeled his energy through his body, and the man rolled on the ground and screamed, begging for mercy. Kang Seo calmly said that he would now have to repeat out loud that he would never plot evil against the owners of Spring Pavilion again. The man immediately, stumbling over his words, repeated his every word. Kang Seo let him go and looked around and said that from what he understood, they had another leader. Dong-man asked if it was Sang-wook and added that he had been watching from the sidelines, but he honestly didn't know where he was. Hyungnim, who was hiding nearby, mentally cursed at his men, calling them useless idiots, and concluded that it was time to leave as soon as possible. Kang Seo turned sharply to the side and saw a man rushing out from around the corner. He said confidently that it looked like he was the one. Meanwhile, the fleeing Hyungnim turned around and mumbled to himself, trying to convince himself that Kang Seo wouldn't catch up with him. Kang Seo quickly caught up with him and asked him if he had really only been able to run to this place. Sang-wook confusedly admitted that he had scared him a lot. He then proceeded to yell and demanded an explanation as to who the man was and why he was attacking people for innocent pranks. He irritably stated that he would definitely go to the police. However, Kang Seo came closer and interrogated with mockery if he really called it a prank. He recalled that the guy came at night to damage his motorcycle and asked if he thought such acts were harmless fun. Sang-wook, trembling, replied that he wouldn't do anything to him. Kang So held out his hand and said that diseased branches should be cut off before they infect the whole tree. Sang-wook, turning pale, began to stagger back and murmured surreptitiously for him to stop and not come any closer. An hour later, Yu Sun-tae was sitting in the kitchen peeling onions in preparation for tomorrow's meals. His phone vibrated and looked at the screen and became indignant. He exclaimed that that bastard Sang-wook dared to text him and read the beginning of the message out loud, where he apologized for everything. Kang Seo, hearing this, walked over and asked if Sang-wook had really sent the message. Yu Sun-tae nodded and added that he promised to stop being a creep and would go back to his village to start working on the farm. He asked how on earth he had managed to re-educate this stubborn bully. Kang So replied with indifference that all he did was talk to him calmly. Yu Sun-tae reflected that even though Sang-wook had behaved like a brute, he had once been part of the Spring Pavilion team. He was glad that the man had finally come to his senses. At that moment, Kim Ji-eun walked into the restaurant and said hello. Yu Sun-tae greeted her, adding an apology for calling her in on her day off. She responded without a shadow of displeasure, saying that she didn't have any plans for today anyway. Yu Sun-tae explained that they were short-handed right now, and his wife and Ha-yoon had gone to a morning event at the kindergarten. Kang Seo remarked that today was just about to be tree planting day. Ji-eun mentioned with a smile that her younger brother is also going to participate in tree planting and is doing it as a charity. Kang Seo asked if her brother was into volunteering. She was confused and replied that yes, her brother was just very kind, and to change the subject, she hurriedly offered to get to work. Mentally, she noted irritably how much his habit of asking uncomfortable questions was bothering her. As they sat down to peel onions, Yu Sun-tae said that Ha-yoon and So-young were probably having a good time and confessed that it was strange not having anyone at home, even lonely. Kang Seo said that even Squeak seemed to be getting bored lately. Yu Sun-tae said anxiously that new portals had started opening in the mountains recently, and he hoped his family would be safe. Ji-eun rushed to reassure him, explaining that the Hunter Association is in charge of security at such events. She added that the Rostachek kindergarten is also under the association's supervision. Strong hunters are sent there, so even if the Class A portal is opened, the children would not be in any danger. Yu Sung-tae was relieved that her words had actually calmed him down. He asked how she knew all of this, since he himself had worked for the association for a long time, but he hadn't heard of such a thing. Ji-eun, a little nervous, replied that it was a secret and she couldn't divulge such information. Meanwhile, in another area of the city, a man irritably complained that he couldn't even enjoy the nice weather quietly on his day off. He asked why he had been summoned today. He annoyingly exclaimed that it was an event that Ji-eun was supposed to attend. The receptionist calmly explained that the young lady had some urgent business to attend to. She asked that the person who was least helpful be sent to the event, then added that it wasn't hard to guess that she was talking about him specifically. The man grumbled indignantly that he couldn't believe it. The girl reminded him that he was going to the event for a reason. The man asked what she meant. She interjected in surprise. Hadn't he looked at his schedule? An influential person from the association would be coming to the party, and this was his chance to make an impression. She clarified that she was referring to the country's most famous C-grade artifact master, Seo Chul. The man asked in bewilderment, so he had come here just to make an impression? The receptionist explained that the master had a business appointment. Then she sternly reminded him that she had sent him the information he was supposed to read. The man confusedly exclaimed what other materials and asked not to report anything to Ji-eun. The girl said that if he continued like this, she would be forced to report to Madam. He added fearfully that she would definitely kill him and not figuratively at all. The girl said he was exaggerating. The secretary reminded him that his job was to make a good impression on Master Seo Chul. She emphasized that finding an awakened Zero was just as important as connecting with such a famous artifact master. Pushing him towards the exit, she hurriedly added that they had already arrived, and it was time for him to greet him. The man confusedly objected that he couldn't just walk up like that. Gathering himself, he walked up to the master and bowed and greeted him, introducing himself as Kim Ho-eun of the Red Dragon Guild. He added that his father had often talked about him. Seo Chul clarified if he was Hae-chul's son. Kim Ho confirmed and said he was honored to meet in person. Seo Chul said it was nice to meet him too and asked him to go have fun at the event, adding not to let him interfere with him socializing with his grandson. Kim Ho noted to himself that the rumors were true. The old man was indeed a creep. The master's assistant hastily apologized, bowing and explaining that the master wasn't always prepared for such situations. Kim Ho said it was fine. When he turned back to the secretary, she remarked with a sneer that she didn't expect anything else from him. He mumbled that his sister already knew how this was going to end, and asked why he should have sent him in the first place. He added with irritation that he did not understand where she had slipped away on such an important day, leaving all her duties on the shoulders of her younger brother. The secretary replied that the young lady had gone to socialize with her idol. The day before, Kang Seo, carefully carving a figurine out of wood, asked if the girl was really upset because there was no bunny trowel. When he finished, he handed her the finished figurine and said with a smile that she now had her own bunny. Ha Yun said that her uncle was the best. But the next day, Ha Yun was upset and began to cry because her uncle's gift was broken. One girl looked at the broken shovel and asked quietly and worriedly what to do. Ha Yun's tears began to flow with renewed vigor. Her friend frowned and sternly reminded her that she had warned her to be careful with her shovel. The others, who had turned slightly pale, frightenedly confirmed her words and began to apologize. Seo Chul, who was watching from a distance, came closer. Ha Yun, sobbing, confessed that her uncle had made the bunny for her and now it was broken. The old man leaned toward her and asked if she wanted her grandfather to fix her bunny. The girl looked at him hopefully and asked if he could do it. Seo Chul replied without a shadow of a doubt that Grandpa can do anything if you just ask. He examined the spatula carefully and noted to himself how unusual the work was. He wondered who could have made such a thing. At that moment, Un Chik appeared and said that he had brought a scroll. Seo Chul asked him to come closer, and pointing to the item, he exclaimed that it was a work of skillful craftsmanship. He wondered if any of his students were capable of such a filigree technique, because even he, with his experience, would have a hard time replicating such a piece. He then turned to Ha Yun and said with a warm smile that her uncle was very fond of her. The girl responded by saying that she loved her uncle very much too. Seo Chul said with a serious look that he would make sure to fix it, because the girl's uncle had done his best. It was only a few minutes later, and he was already handing Ha Yun the carefully restored wooden bunny. Ha Yun thanked him with shining eyes. Kim Ho, who was watching from the sidelines, quietly remarked to himself that this craftsman doesn't buy anything. He needs a special approach. Suddenly, he said he had an idea and told his assistants to change their communication strategy. Recently, Kang Seo had gotten into the habit of going straight to the bakery when he received his isolationist allowance, to buy his favorite roll, which he had first tried during his training at the association. Once inside, he greeted the owner warmly and immediately asked if there were any rolls left. When he looked around and saw none, he asked with slight disappointment if everything was sold out. The owner, smiling happily, took out a box from the refrigerator and hastened to assure him that he had set aside one roll just for him. Kang Seo glowed and thanked him for always helping him out. He said that if he didn't eat the whole roll today, he should put the rest in the fridge. Kang Seo confirmed that he would, thanked him, and said goodbye. On the way out of the bakery, he politely held the door for the girl, letting her go in first. She thanked him. The owner took one look at her and exclaimed happily that it was Hyun Misi and that the weather had been great the past few days. He added with a laugh that it's a beautiful day for a picnic, isn't it? Later that evening, Kang Seo ate dinner and, following the baker's advice, put the rest of the roll in the refrigerator. He noticed Squeaky looking at the sweet treat with curiosity and slight envy. Kang Seo turned to her, reminding her that she had already gotten her piece, and if she wanted more, it would have to wait until tomorrow. At breakfast, they eat the rest together. Late at night, when Kang Seo was already asleep, Squeaker woke up smelling a delicious odor. After making sure her master was sound asleep, she headed to the kitchen with frantic enthusiasm. When she reached the top, she found, to her horror, that the entire roll had already been eaten. It was at that moment that Kang Seo sternly called out her name, silently sneaking up on her. The next morning, he told Yu Sun-tai about it, and the latter was genuinely surprised when he asked if Squeak had actually eaten the roll. Kang Seo sighed tiredly and confirmed that she denied everything, but after all, it was obvious who was to blame. Someone entered the restaurant. Yu Sun-tai greeted the new customer, and then was surprised to recognize Hyuk. Hyuk, smiling, said he had come in for a beer with friends, and picked up the roll and clarified that he had brought it as a bribe because he needed to have a serious talk. Yu Suntae worriedly asked what was wrong because his friend's face looked anxious. The latter blushed and admitted that he wanted to ask how the latter confessed his love to his wife. After drinking some beer, Hyuk revealed that he was in love with a girl, a frequent visitor to the bakery. She was beautiful and nice, and he had been thinking about her for 3 months, but he didn't know how to approach her. He was afraid that if he confessed to her, Hyun-mi would start avoiding him. Kang-so confidently told him to stop worrying, because thinking like that could make him sick. Hyuk cried and said that he wasn't as handsome as Kang-so, and that a clumsy guy like him couldn't be worthy of such a beautiful girl. Yu Sun-tae interrupted him, saying that looks weren't the most important thing and that he shouldn't worry about it. Hyuk suddenly sobbed loudly, saying that he had made a mistake, and immediately lost consciousness. Yu Sun-tae said with annoyance that he had clearly had too much to drink, and now he had to be put down somehow. Kang Seo offered to move him to his room. When asked if it would be a burden, he said not at all, since he owed him for all the rolls he had saved for him. Later that night, when Hyuk was already asleep, Kang Seo noticed Squeak suddenly waving his paws as if he sensed something. He asked with slight suspicion what was wrong. Then, with a sigh, he muttered that something strange had been happening to her lately. Squeaky jumped out of his arms and, pointing vigorously at the door, ran into the kitchen. He followed her and, approaching the refrigerator, opened it and froze from surprise. There, the girl with wings was eating a roll and screamed in surprise. The next morning, Kang Seo gathered everyone in one room, looked carefully at the little girl, and asked if she had accidentally stolen his sweet roll. The little girl said her name was Do-sun, and with a guilty look on her face, she added that she had done a very bad thing and sincerely apologized. Yu Sun-tae said that he didn't understand how a flower fairy suddenly appeared in their kitchen, as they are usually attracted to flowers or honey. Hyung suggested that maybe it was the honey in the roll that lured her in. Kang Seo frowned and looked from one to the other, then asked with interest what a flower fairy was. Hyun explained that fairies were humanoid spirits that used to live in portals, and since the portals themselves had appeared, they had begun to move into human cities. Humankind had destroyed the magical monsters, but the fairies had decided not to touch them, because they did not harm people, and sometimes even helped them. So they settled in the protected cities. Kang Seo nodded slightly and clarified if such creatures were something like their squeaker. Yu Sun-tae confirmed with a slight smile that it was possible. Sometimes there were some capricious fairies, but they weren't a serious threat. Kang Seo sighed, and looking at the begging eyes of the little fairy, finally said that he forgave her this time, but asked her never to steal again. The fairy dramatically threw up her hands and exclaimed with determination that she was very ashamed, but she wanted to eat and work. Yu Sun-tae asked in amazement if she really wanted to get a job with them. So Young asked how a flower fairy could be useful in a Chinese restaurant. Hyun stated that such an assistant would come in handy in his workshop. Yu Sun-tae said that it all seemed like they were dumping their responsibility on their older brother. Kang Seo offered a compromise that he could train him, and he would hire a fairy in return. So Young perked up and happily said it was a great idea, and admitted that men like Kang Seo are definitely capable of winning any woman's heart. Hyun thanked him, saying that he had long neglected his appearance, and it was undermining his confidence. Kang Seo said that he just wanted to practice not alone. Hyun enthusiastically announced that he was ready to start immediately. At this time, So Young quietly turned to her husband and asked with a smile if he wanted to join. The next day at the mall, Kang Seo recalled that So Young had asked her not to say anything to Yu Sun-tae and Ha Yoon, and wondered why they were here. So Young confessed that it was his husband's birthday the day after tomorrow, and she wanted to pick out a gift for him, but she wasn't sure what to buy yet. Jian cheerfully took her hand and assured her that she would definitely help. She thought that she had never had an opportunity like this even with her friends, and it was especially nice to do it together with Kang Seo, even though there was an Onni nearby. In her heart, Ji-eun felt like it was a real date. So Young asked Kang Seo not to tell Sun-tae about it and suggested hiding the gifts in his room. Kang Seo nodded and said he understood. Ji-eun asked what gift she would like to give her husband. So Young shared the thought of buying new shoes, but admitted that she wasn't sure if he would wear them. Ji-eun suggested buying vitamins or supplements since the boss has been getting tired a lot lately. So Young happily exclaimed that she knew she was a great gift giver. While they were choosing, Kang Seo felt that he was often looked at and whispered at. He leaned over to So Young and asked if she minded if he went from here. Ji-eun hurriedly protested. She pulled out her cap and glasses, suggesting that he put them on so the people around him wouldn't notice how handsome he was. They walked over to the toy department, and Ji-eun excitedly said that Ha-yoon would probably like this toy. Suddenly, a sharp alarm blared throughout the mall, and a loudspeaker sounded a warning about illegal awakenings. The loudspeaker urged shoppers to remain calm and not leave their seats. Kang-so asked who the illegals were. Kim-ji explained that it was the name given to those awakened ones who used their powers for crime. Kang-so thought that the aura on one of them was different from anything he had seen before. He remarked aloud that it was strange because the illegals couldn't be unaware of the security barrier around the mall. No one could get through such a barrier except the ones who set it up. So they must have another purpose. Kim-ji agreed, suggesting that it could be a distraction. Kang-so quickly asked if there were any magic stones stored in the basement of the building. Kim-ji confirmed that it was likely that there were indeed high-grade stones there. She tried to reassure herself and everyone by saying that the guards had everything under control and would definitely sort it out. So-young worriedly remarked that now they might be too late to pick Ha-yoon up from the daycare center. She dialed the number, but all she heard was the answering machine's voice. Kang-seo thought about how upset Ha-yoon would be and realized that he couldn't sit idly by. He asked Ji-eun to stay by So-young's side and said he had to go to the restroom. Kim-ji nodded in surprise and wished him to be careful. Kang-seo quickly went around all the floors and went down to the basement where he found many injured people. He immediately used his healing magic but realized that the condition of most remained critical. He noticed a door ajar and saw a man with a sword giving orders. Kang-seo instantly used the wind technique and neutralized all the enemies in 2 seconds. He thought that even though the interrogation could no longer be done, he would still learn the truth from the rumors. The rest could be left to the association. Meanwhile, the girl who arrived with the guards guessed that those in black clothes were distractions to hide the real purpose of stealing the stones. She quickly commanded Min-woo to detain everyone involved in the robbery from the store. Then, jumping down from the 5th floor, she told her 2 assistants to follow her to the basement. Inside, they found the neutralized enemies and began to examine the bodies. The girl was puzzled as to what had happened here and who had managed to deal with the robbers before them. The next day, Kang-seo reminded Sun-tae with a smile that today was his birthday, and he was all work. Sun-tae said that there was nothing special about the day. Just a birthday, that's all. Kang-seo said that for everyone else, it's not an ordinary day at all. Just as he finished his sentence, the door opened and So-yeon walked in with a cake in her hands. She happily wished her husband a happy birthday, followed by Ha-yoon singing a song and exclaiming that their beloved, kind daddy was the best in the world. Hyun walked into the restaurant with a gift and wondered if he was late. Ji-eun, who came next, cheerfully said she was here too. Soon-tae thanked everyone with a tremor in his voice. So-yeon said it was time to blow out the candles because his eyes were wet. The next morning, Kang-seo curiously asked Yoo Sun-tae if today was really Children's Day. Yoo Sun-tae confirmed that it was, and since it was a day off, the restaurant might be able to make a good profit. Kang-seo nodded and noted that he had read about the significance of the day being all about children, and added that Ha-yoon was also a child. Yoo Sun-tae, smiling, said that he was just planning to take his daughter to an illusionist show after lunch. He expressed concern that the load-in would be before lunch. Only how would they manage if Ji-eun wasn't here today? Kang-seo stated that he had foreseen this and had already invited a substitute. At that moment, a boy walked into the restaurant, and Kang-seo noticed that he was right on time. Yoo Sun-tae approached him and politely asked if he could present the guardian's consent certificate and medical document. The boy held out the necessary papers without hesitation. After receiving the confirmation, Yoo Sun-tae asked him to wash his hands and start by washing the dishes, to which the boy willingly agreed. Observing his actions, Yoo Sun-tae said that he was working quite fast, which meant that he was an awakened one. Kang-seo said that it's not just something he does. He used to deliver newspapers every day and learned how to do it. He added that even if he has the ability of an awakened one, he still needs to practice all the skills. Yoo Sun-tae wondered why Ji-eun, being a G-grade awakened, works so much more nimbly than this C-grade boy. Meanwhile, Ji-eun was riding in the car, listening to the voice of the receptionist who informed her that they would be arriving soon. The girl was reminded that immediately upon exiting, she needed to greet the president, then the chairman of the association, and afterward with the executive directors of the guilds. Ji-eun nodded and clarified if her father would appear at the event. The secretary informed her that he had promised to pay a short visit. Ji-eun quietly repeated that he must be really busy. She then said that today was Children's Day, so why did she have to be at the corporate event today? She was particularly annoyed by the dark, flashy makeup and the red suit. The secretary reminded her that red was the symbol of the Red Dragon Guild and asked her to be patient. She added that for the children, their guild should be an example and an object of aspiration. Covering her lips with lipstick, Ji-eun ironically remarked, "What kind of example could it be if they were struggling to make it through each new portal?" She sighed and added that it was because of them that the country was still prosperous and safe, as their world was constantly teetering on the edge of a precipice. The secretary reminded her that the girl should not forget her status, as she was the face of the guild, the witch of the red flame. Handing her a napkin, she pointed out that it was only natural for an awakened girl from a good upper-class family to be so beautiful. She advised her not to be ashamed of it. Ji-eun thought that she had once wanted to appear more mature so that she wouldn't be condescended to because of her age, but now that makeup was part of her image. The receptionist asked her how her hobby of playing a lower-class person was going. Ji-eun brushed it off, assuring her that she goes undercover to be ready to protect ordinary citizens in case of an emergency. The secretary said with a smile that she was glad the young mistress had something to do, an outlet besides work and guild business. When they arrived at the place, the secretary hurriedly went out and opened the door for the mistress. Ji-eun thought it had been a long time since she had returned to her role as a real hunter. Later, an hour later, the assistant pointed to the booth and excitedly exclaimed that there was a dart-throwing game. Kang Seo wondered if the assassins were now practicing in broad daylight, but Ha-yoon explained that it was just a recreational game. He realized that it was the usual civilization fun, so beloved by modern people. The assistant added that points were awarded for each balloon burst. Ha-yoon excitedly pointed to the display case and said delightedly that the biggest prize was a huge teddy bear. Kang Seo leaned over and asked if she would like to get such a teddy bear. The girl with shining eyes said that if she had such a teddy bear, she would be incredibly happy and wouldn't even want sweets. Kang Seo clarified with a smile, "What about the chocolates?" Ha-yoon, blushing slightly, admitted that sweets were still her weakness. Kang Seo asked the boy to try out the game and make friends with Ha-yoon. Ha-yoon awkwardly scratched the back of his head and admitted that his ability to blast in civilian life was useless, even though he was awakened. Kang Seo asked what it was, and the boy explained that it was a weak ability that could only blind a monster for a moment. In real life, it was practically inapplicable. Kang Seo reassuringly said that it was fine and suggested that he try it, following his instructions. The boy wondered if he was joking. Kang Seo walked up to the fair's counter and calmly looked at the organizer and asked for 3 darts. The boy asked fearfully how he could hit a 100-point ball with all 3 darts in one shot, which was impossible. Kang Seo explained that one must first stand steady and tense the bark muscles. If the thrower is unstable, the center of gravity of the weapon will also be off. The shoulders and hands should be relaxed, aim just above the target, and most importantly, concentrate. The boy threw the dart and shouted excitedly that he had hit it. Kang Seo said with a smile that it wasn't that hard. At this time, the loudspeakers announced that the illusionist Woo Kang-kyul's show was about to begin, and the audience was invited to take their seats. Ha-yoon enthusiastically jumped up and shouted that the show was starting and ran. Kang Seo laughingly asked her not to run, or she would fall. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, 2 men were talking in whispers. One of them said worriedly that the whole thing was too dangerous. His partner replied that when they received an order, they had no choice. He asked if it was better to die, because if they did not fulfill the mission, they would be the target. He said confidently that there was nothing to fear, because they had a special tool. Even if the strongest awakened ones started to pursue them, they would not be able to detect anything. The first man nodded with a nervous sigh and clarified that their only target was still the Bloodflower site. The second man confirmed that this was the real target, Kim Ji-eun, known as the Red Flame Witch. She is the one who must be destroyed. Meanwhile, Ha-yoon, energetically, she exclaimed that this is where the great place is. The boy said that from there, one would be able to properly see the illusions with levitation. Kang Seo said with a slight chuckle that he could do that himself. But when he saw the boy's surprised face, He hurriedly said he was just kidding. The boy said that his favorite trick was when the illusionist cut a person in half and then somehow put them back together. Kang Seo wondered if they also have such shows where a magician cuts a body and then puts it back together. The boy said that even when you know it's all just a trick, it still looks very convincing. Kang Seo said he doesn't even know if it can be called a trick. Suddenly he felt a very familiar aura. He thought maybe it's Ji-un? Pointing to the side, Kang Seo asked the boy who was there in the more distant area. The boy glanced over there and said that it was the VIP area. Kang Seo clarified, "Did that mean that woman was a special person?" The boy nodded with admiration and said that it was the Black Rose. He added that in South Korea, if someone didn't know her, they would probably be mistaken for a spy. Kang Seo thought that if she was so popular, then she must be an incredibly strong hunter. The boy eagerly confirmed that this was indeed the case in front of him, one of the top hunters of the Red Dragon Guild, which was one of the top 3 strongest in the country. Kang Seo, hearing this, mentally concluded that Ji-un Sisi was not an ordinary girl at all. Meanwhile, Ji-un, covering her face with paper, was watching them with panic in her eyes. She silently awed as she thought about why her Spring Pavilion colleagues were here right now. However, in the next second, she admitted to herself that she still adored looking at Kang Seo. Kang Seo took a deep breath and concluded that Ji-un must have her own good reasons for hiding her true identity. A man came on stage and loudly announced that the Great Illusion Show was starting. Kang Seo, watching this performance, thought in amazement as he wondered how they moved objects without the slightest trace of magic. But in the next instant, he sensed danger and instantly created a wide protective barrier. The bullet hit the shield, ricocheted off, and crashed into another barrier near the VIP area, leaving cracks in its wake. One of the bodyguards picked up the bullet and examined it, surprised to see that the projectile was loaded with aura. In the same second, a flurry of bullets rushed towards them. The bodyguards shouted, ordering them to protect the mistress and strengthen the shield. However, even the powerful shield couldn't withstand the energy waves, and it shattered, and the guards were thrown back. One of them thought with horror, "What kind of ammunition is this, if even it pierces through the strongest energy shield?" Ji-un stepped forward resolutely to protect them, and asked why they were inactive, weren't going to look for the criminals? The guards replied that it would be done. A disturbing thought flashed through Ji-un's mind. What is happening now, and is her friends from the restaurant okay? The organization on the loudspeaker ordered the citizens to evacuate immediately. Onlookers were asked to follow to the exit. So Young, anxiously clutching Ha-yoon to her, whispered that everything was fine, Mommy was near, there was no need to be afraid. But the girl, sobbing bitterly, said that her teddy bear was hurt, and went to her father to ask for a hand. Kang Seo, noticing Ha-yoon crying, clenched his fists. He silently swore that he would find the culprits and make them pay. He said he had to go to the restroom urgently and promised to come back soon. Then he added that the danger had apparently passed. Kang Seo was on the roof in a second, and saw one sniper shouting with rage that he should have killed her with the first shot. The one who made the excuse that he was aiming for her head, but the bullet had ricocheted off for some reason. Kang Seo wondered if that was really worth fighting over. The sniper asked what he should do now. Should he shoot the civilian to cause panic and get away with the noise? Kang Seo gritted his teeth in anger. He was furious. They wanted to shoot civilians. Kang Seo took out 2 enemy bullets and put energy into them, then threw them back with energy. The snipers fell down with cries of pain. One of them snapped to a scream and cursed him, promising that they would come for him. Kang Seo thought that not only was Ha-yoon crying because of them, but they were also going to shoot civilians. The sniper, squirming in pain, barely said that he didn't know who he was, but he wouldn't be forgiven. Kang Seo asked who was coming for him, but he only heard the approaching footsteps of the hunters. He thought that the associations would take care of it, and he should go back to Ha-yoon and her family. The next day, Sora, who was watching the children, suddenly received a disturbing message. She told the kids to behave and added that she would return to them soon. As she left the room, she answered the phone and clearly said that Go Sora was on the line. She listened carefully and said that she understood and acknowledged that he was right. This could very well be an assassination attempt by the illegals, and the children needed extra security. On the other end of the wire, she replied gratefully that she would take on the task, even though it was a task for the inspection department. At that moment, the children came out of the room and called out to her. Sora, shuddering, hurriedly answered them that, let them wait for a while, she would take care of everything now and would definitely call them back. Sora, smiling, entered the room and, clapping her hands, apologized to the children for waiting and asked them if they knew what day it would be tomorrow. The children answered with a friendly chorus of their parents' day. So-yoon informed them that today they would be making paper carnations, as it was a wonderful way to express gratitude to their moms and dads. After a while, Sora came over to Ha-yoon, leaned over her work, and said how beautiful her work was. She asked who she was going to give it to. Ha-yoon, glowing, replied that she would give it to her mom and dad, of course. A boy cheerfully announced that he was making 4 flowers at once for Mom, Dad, Grandpa, and Grandma. Another boy added that he was making a carnation for Daddy. Sora's gaze stopped on Young-hoon sitting quietly. Her face took on a shadow of sadness, but sitting down next to him, she noted with a soft smile that his carnation turned out very beautiful as well. One of the boys suddenly asked, "Did Young-hoon have someone to give it to?" Another child added, without hesitation, that Young-hoon doesn't have any parents. He lives with his aunt, and that his mom makes him be friends with him even though he doesn't want to be. Sora put her hand on his shoulder and sadly thought that you can't say that. Ha-yoon jumped up abruptly from her seat and said indignantly that they were bad boys. She asked if they didn't have a mom and dad, what would it be like for them to hear questions about who they were making carnations for? The other boys, realizing their words, cried and confessed that they didn't want to lose their parents at all. Ha-yoon said that since they were so scared to imagine such a thing, why did they ask Jung-hoon such stupid and hurtful questions? Sora, trying to bring back order, urged the kids to remember what to do if one made a mistake. The boys replied that one should apologize. Then Sora told them in a stern voice to do it right now and never say anything like that to Young-hoon again. The children all apologized in unison. Young-hoon quietly mumbled that it was okay. Ha-yoon put her hand on his shoulder and smiled encouragingly, and suggested that they stop crying and finish the carnations together. Young-hoon agreed and said he would give the carnation to his aunt. Ha-yoon warmly assured him that she would definitely be happy to receive such a gift. At this time, the secretary was walking down the hallway and thought that the guild leader, Kim Hae-chul, was an A-class awakened one. He appeared back in the age of chaos. Hae-chul had become a master of magic sword and fire magic, one of those great warriors who helped win the war against monsters. She recognized that this was the greatest guild in South Korea, and Hae-chul himself sometimes frightened her. Mo-yoon mentally asked herself not to make any mistakes and gathered her courage and knocked. When she heard the permission, she entered and greeted the leader, then said she would read out his schedule for the day. He interrupted her, however, and demanded to hear first about the progress of the investigation into the assassination attempt on his daughter, which had been carried out using ammunition loaded with aura. The secretary reported that the Silver Tower faction was currently under suspicion, but no new information had been received so far. Hae-chul pounded his fist on the desk, angrily ordering him to immediately find the customers at all costs. At all costs. He demanded to find out who dared to make an attempt on his daughter's life. Mo-yoon nodded and said that the order would be carried out. She handed him a folder and told him that she had gathered the materials about Spring Pavilion Restaurant as he had requested. After looking through the documents, the leader was surprised that this was the owner of the restaurant. The secretary confirmed that it was Yu Song-tae, the man she had explored the dungeons together before, and according to her, he was a talented cook. She cautiously asked what should be done with him. Ha-chul recalled that after his wife Ji-eun died, she had only lived for revenge, and for the first time in a long time, she was interested in something else. He admitted that he had sympathy for the restaurant owner and told her to just keep him under surveillance without touching him. Mo-yoon agreed and withdrew. Hae-chul stood up, walked over to the safe, and pulled out a neatly kept paper carnation. He thought fondly that it was the first carnation Ji-eun had ever given him. At the sight of this symbol, the fatigue and irritation that had accumulated during the day vanished without a trace. He thought hopefully that maybe someday his daughter would smile as often again as she did when she was a child. The next day, the boy came to the restaurant earlier than usual and enthusiastically asked if they had finished their work yet. Kang-seo stopped to sweep and was surprised to note that he had come much earlier than usual. The boy cheerfully reported that thanks to the training he'd been doing, he'd learned how to deliver newspapers much faster. Kang-seo said that everything was due to his own efforts. He was only giving advice. The boy admitted that he used to feel depressed. He thought his life would always be so boring and ordinary until the end. But thanks to Kang-seo's training and advice, he realized that he could achieve anything he wanted. He had thought that he would never advance in the class, and had never imagined that the dart-throwing technique he had been taught could have such a great effect on his abilities. Kang Seo curiously asked him what exactly he was talking about. The boy hastily clarified that he was referring to the benefits of darts. However, Kang Seo frowned, noting that this was the second time he had spoken as if he would stay in C grade forever, and asked for an explanation. The boy said that it was obvious that the chance of a person reawakening was almost zero, and even if one survived the reawakening, there was no guarantee that the class would increase. Kang Seo clutched the broom with such force that his fingers turned white. He thought with annoyance that the boy was wrong. After all, the awakening was only the beginning. How come the people of this civilization still didn't understand it? Then he asked the boy what breathing techniques he knew. He asked the boy, confused, what they were and what they were for. Kang Seo mentally noted that it was clear that the awakened of this world did not even know the importance of breathing techniques. That's why they have so little control over their energy. The boy looked at his watch and hurriedly said that it was getting late. He had to get the last of the newspapers out. He waved his hand and promised to return tomorrow. An hour passed, and seeing Kang Seo sighing all the time, he asked if something was bothering him. Kang Seo asked what he would do if he knew the secret to making all the awakened ones much stronger. Yu Sun-tai said that he would definitely share this knowledge. Kang Seo asked, and would he expect nothing in return? Yu Sun-tai laughed, explaining that if his home and his family were protected by stronger awakened ones, that would be enough for him. After all, he isn't capable of guarding civilization by himself, but he wants Ha-Yun to live in a safe world. Kang Seo nodded and acknowledged that he understood. Then Yu Sun-tai said like this, and handed him a glass and offered him a drink of Coke. Kang Seo thought that he was living undercover in this world precisely because he didn't want to bring chaos. But if he revealed the secret of the breathing technique, then perhaps there would be more order in this world. After all, that was exactly what he wanted. But Kang Seo resolutely concluded that it was time. He would create a breathing technique for the awakened. Kang Seo spent all his time in the room, never leaving his desk, bent over papers. He wrote, he drew, he double-checked, and finally, he thought tiredly, he hadn't slept a wink for 2 days, and he had just finished. Kang Seo was proud, for with this development, the awakened could learn to concentrate the aura in their own bodies, preventing the energy from escaping. He called his technique the pure and righteous heart technique, putting the depth of his intentions into those words. Then he quietly told himself that the only thing left was to find a way to spread it. His thoughts carried him back to yesterday's conversation. He wondered if she could tell him about the president of the Hunter Association, what kind of person he was. Jian replied that he was a great man whose name should go down in history, because if it weren't for him, Korea might not exist anymore. According to her, he always showed up where help was needed most, and was someone who more than deserved his position. Kang Seo thought that a just man with power was the right person to take responsibility for distributing his manuscript. He thought that if Ji-eun was saying it with such confidence, then perhaps the president was trustworthy, and he was the one who could be entrusted with the secret. He stood up, picked up his notebook, and quietly said to himself that it would be a good idea to take a little walk. After a while, the president of the association went up to the 69th floor. He greeted all the staff and asked them to bring him a cup of coffee. One of the assistants immediately replied that it would be right away. Glancing at his desk, the president noticed someone else's notebook and picked it up with interest. He muttered aloud the name of the method of a pure and righteous heart. At that moment, the secretary returned, holding a cup, and said he had brought coffee. The president inquired if he knew what the notebook was. The secretary apologetically admitted that, unfortunately, he did not know. He noticed that the title sounded like a martial arts story, perhaps a novel. He smiled and asked, what had he read about such a thing? After all, these stories always have a hero who finds an ancient manuscript, after which he becomes incredibly strong. The secretary said that if reading books really gave such abilities, life would be much more pleasant. The president opened the notebook and thought for a moment. The handwriting was certainly not elegant, but it felt energetic. He began to read the notebook, and the further he dipped into the lines, the more surprised he became. This method involved strengthening the connection between the dantian and the energy core, allowing the aura to be used almost losslessly, which would make the awakened ones much more effective in battle. Several hours passed, but he read each page with increasing interest. The author claimed that those who learned this method would realize that the Awakened's class system was not the ceiling at all, but merely the beginning of human development. The author emphasized that he was sharing the method freely, and only hoped that the knowledge would be used for the sake of peace and security. Hei-chul thought deeply. Scientists all over the world had been puzzling over how to raise the level of awakened ones for a long time, but all the research had been in vain. He couldn't help but wonder who was capable of creating something so grandiose. The method was not only laid out logically, but also very convincing. And yet there was still the mystery of who had brought the notebook into the study and why. He flipped to the very end and suddenly exclaimed, unable to hide his shock, that this was the same trace of the awakened Zero class. This was the only trace they had found. If he was the author of the method, then there could be no doubt about the effectiveness and goodness of the intention. Hei-chul read the last line where the author hoped that this method wouldn't cause him personally any trouble. He realized that it was definitely him, and if that was his will, he had no objections. He remembered that even Li Xin had difficulty controlling energy. Tucking the notebook into his jacket pocket, he said that it would be interesting to see Li Xin's reaction when he read this technique. He immediately ordered to contact him immediately. An hour later, Li Xin walked into the office, irritably asking what was wrong, reminding him that he couldn't bear to leave the house. Hei-chul handed him a notebook and asked him to read it, because it might be the one that contained the answers he had been looking for so long. Li Xin took the notebook, carelessly flipped through a few pages, and mockingly asked where he got the worn notebook. However, when he started reading, he froze and asked in shock what it was. Hei-chul smiled and confessed that he had been expecting that expression on his face, which meant the day was definitely going well. Li Xin raised his voice and demanded to know what it was. Hei-chul laughed and said, "Can't you see that this is the method of a pure and righteous heart?" He recalled that the latter had flown overseas more than once to meet zero-grade awakened ones and learn how they dealt with excess energy. Li Xin nodded, remembering that this was indeed the case, but all he had received were ridiculous answers about needing to be reborn as a zero-grade. However, with a shudder, he recognized that here, at last, might be hiding the real solution to his long-standing problem. He asked again where the method came from. Hei-chul replied that let it be a gift from the only awakened Zero class in the entire country. He recalled that he'd just found a notebook on his desk when he came to work, and it's not clear how it got here, and the cameras didn't record any break-ins. Li Xin asked if he could be the first to learn the method. Hei-chul said that's what he called him for, even if there were side effects. His level would allow him to handle it. Li Xin thanked him. After leaving the building, he couldn't get rid of his obsessive thought for a long time. Who was this first zero-grade awakened? A few days later, Li Xin went for a walk, and noticing a park bench, he wondered if he should sit down and rest for a while. He slowly lowered himself onto the bench and looked up to the sky, thinking with involuntary admiration at how clear it was. Li Xin wondered with some amazement when was the last time he had even left the house. He admitted to himself that he could no longer even remember the last time he had so carelessly bathed in the sunlight, just enjoying the peace. People greeted the new C-grade hero with rapturous amazement at his miraculous appearance. The hopes of the entire nation rested on him, for he was the first one who had managed to close the portal from the class. But behind this glory lay tragedy. His comrades, those he shared the battlefield with, were killed. It was from that time that he began to fear his own power. He admitted to himself that since then his life had become an endless struggle with himself. The harder he tried to master his power, the more violently it spiraled out of control, leaving him more and more alone. He reminded himself that because of his efforts, many were able to return to a peaceful life. But no matter how hard it was for him, he continued to live, continued to fight. Looking at his palm, Li Xin thought that he hadn't fully mastered the method yet. There was no way he could relax. He remembered how he had hated his strength for a long time, but everything changed after he mastered the pure and righteous heart method. It was this technique that allowed him to overpower his energy and break the zero-grade barrier. He admitted to himself that the person who had written this method was without a doubt his true benefactor. Noticing the man carrying the boxes, Li Xin curiously noted to himself that that courier must have the ability and that his class was probably no lower than B. Kang Xiao arranged the dishes in front of him, announced that the delivery was from Spring Pavilion Restaurant, and clarified if he was Park Dae-ik. The man confirmed that it was him. Kang Seo listed the order: a small portion of gabahu, 3 servings of jjajangmyeon, and 1 jampong. The man bewilderedly remarked that they hadn't ordered fried dumplings. With a slight smile, Kang Seo explained that it was a gift from the place and wished them a pleasant meal. Meanwhile, Li Xin, smelling the pleasant aroma, had already taken out his phone and entered the name of the restaurant. Standing up from the bench, he happily said that the restaurant was not far away, and now he had to go there. After a couple minutes, Ji-eun held out a glass of water and praised Kang Seo, saying that he was on top of his game today and asked him to take a sip. He thanked her but suddenly froze as if he sensed something. Ji-eun anxiously asked if the water was okay. Kang Seo assured her that the water was fine. He mentally noted that he had sensed someone's incredibly powerful presence back at the park. This young man had a surprisingly strong aura. When Li Xin entered the restaurant, he politely greeted the staff. Hostess Soyun immediately approached and inquired if he had come alone. Li Xin confirmed that he was alone today. Suddenly, he noticed a familiar face, took off his cap and asked with slight shock if it was Ji-eun and what she was doing here. Yu Suntae, noticing what was happening, asked with interest if Ji-eun knew him. He then added that it was as if he had seen his face somewhere before. Ji-eun confusedly replied that it was her cousin. She, laughing nervously, added that he has a completely standard face, so everyone talks as if they've seen it somewhere before. Then, changing the subject, she asked if he would eat the jjajangmyeon and suggested that he eat, and as soon as possible, and leave. Li Xin said that since she was so insistent, let it be jjajangmyeon. After returning with the tray, Ji-eun asked if it was too dangerous for him to leave the house. She reminded him that if there was an attack of uncontrollable energy, she could handle it, but the others. Li Xin interrupted her with a wave of his hand and assured her that that story was already in the past. When asked if he had found any solution, he cryptically replied that she would figure it out for herself at the next training session at the association. Ji-eun said okay and threateningly warned him to keep his mouth shut, since those around her thought she was just an ordinary girl. So-young brought the order and said that since Ji-eun said they were related, she made the portion bigger. Li Xin gratefully said that she shouldn't have. He took the first bite and almost immediately froze, mentally marveling. The dish was very tasty. Though the noodles were burnt in some places, they were fresh, rich, and truly wonderful. He felt a slight sadness at how long it had been since he had experienced such simple joys, but barely had he allowed himself to feel the pleasure as the emotion jolted him abruptly. He stood up anxiously and noted that he had a surge of emotion and his aura had surged violently. However, after looking around, he noticed that fortunately, everything around him remained unharmed. Ji-eun quietly asked if he was done and asked him to leave quickly. Li Xin looked around and thought that what had happened was dangerous. Even though he had learned the pure and righteous heart method, he still lacked experience. Kang Seo thought that it was at least good that he was able to suppress the other's energy with his own in time. He wondered who this young man was. He came to the conclusion that he was probably the C class, the only C class in the country. Although he looked a bit clumsy, he knew the theory perfectly. It was an amazing talent. Ji-eun asked if he liked the food and immediately told him to leave and not come back. Li Xin said with a smile that he understood her hint. Suddenly, the phone rang. He answered it briefly and formally, realizing that he was being summoned to a meeting. Ji-eun asked what was wrong, and hearing about the chairman, she nodded and said goodbye, asking him not to show up here again. When he came out, she exhaled a sigh of relief, thinking that she was already afraid he would give her away. When she saw Kang Seo standing behind her, she immediately rushed over, assuring him that he was indeed her cousin. He nodded, saying that he understood. Later, once in the chairman's office, Li Xin was the first to speak, asking why he had been summoned. Haichul offered to pass and asked if he had time to learn the method. Li Xin confirmed that he had, and the effect was amazing. Haichul noticed that he didn't seem enthusiastic and asked if he had found anything alarming about the method. Li Xin confessed that he had been inspired at first, but after studying it carefully, he realized that if the technique was spread without control, chaos could ensue. Haichul nodded in agreement. He said that when he realized that the method was real and working, he too had misgivings. But there was one thing that scared him even more than the possible side effects. Li Xin looked at him carefully and asked if he was worried about the motives of the creator of this method. He clenched his fist and admitted that, like him, he was feeling anxious. But it wasn't just anxiety. It was more than that. He felt both fear and respect at the same time. Li Xin wondered what the true motives of the awakened Zero class were. The next day, Myung-hee sat in her office, completely focused on her work. Myung-jin walked into the office and placed a cup of coffee in front of her and thoughtfully remarked that her sister could use some cheering up, as she was probably tired. He worriedly asked if she was working too hard at work again. Myung-hee thanked him and confessed that the illegal organizations had been unusually active lately, and that she had too much to do. Myung-jin nodded gravely and added that he had heard that the bomber himself had become active. With a tired sigh, Myung-hee said that because of that bastard, the investigators were working almost dying of stress at work. In addition, their department was under tremendous pressure after the Black Rose assassination incident. Myung-hee wondered if he was busy and what he was doing here at this hour, or if he had just stopped by to bring her coffee. Myung-jin replied that he had a small proposition to make and asked with a smile if she was free next Thursday night. Curiously, she clarified what the matter was. Then he pulled out 2 tickets from his inside pocket. Myung-jin proudly announced that he had managed to get passes for a ballet called Gold Star. He would like her to go with him if he could spare the time. Myung-hee winked at him and suggested with a smile that maybe he was going to go there with a girl, but she had turned him down. Myung-jin remarked with slight offense that she shouldn't be sarcastic, because that wasn't the point at all. Myung-hee then said that it's impossible to refuse a younger brother when he asks so much. Of course she will go. He, satisfied, pointed his finger at the calendar and insisted that she remember to mark the date. She took the pen, circled the correct date, and grinned, wondering if he was satisfied now. Myung-jin released some energy and said that everything was just fine now and promised to help her recover before leaving. Pulling herself up, Myung-hee was relieved to admit that it was as if her thoughts had cleared up after his visit and thanked him. He wished her to take care of herself. Thursday was unexpectedly busy, and the Spring Pavilion family was also going to the ballet. Ha-yoon ran into the room, twirled around, and cheerfully asked her father and uncle if she was pretty. Yoo Sun-tae exclaimed admiringly that their Ha-yoon was a real beauty, and Kang-so added that she was simply adorable. So-young entered the room and looked at her husband with admiration, noting that he looked especially solid today. Yoo Sun-tae said, "Come on, just look at Kang-seo." Ha-yoon clapped her hands and exclaimed that uncle was a star today. Kang-seo looked beautiful and laughing, thanked them. Yoo Sun-tae admitted that he had a bad feeling. Kang-seo was wary, asking if that's what he looked like. So-young assured that it wasn't about his looks at all. They were just worried that he might attract too much attention with his dazzling appearance. Kang-seo replied with a slight smirk that he thanked them for the compliment. Yoo Sun-tae said it was time to go. Later in the auditorium, Yoo Sun-tae noted to himself that wherever Kang-seo went, he was always the center of attention. Kang-seo himself, feeling tense, wondered why he felt a dark energy in such a large and crowded room, as if he were in a dungeon. Feeling a stare, he turned around and suspected that the source of the strange energy might be related to someone present. His eyes stopped on Ji-eun, who had just entered. She, noticing him in his suit, blushed thickly. Ji-eun was confused, thinking that Kang-seo oppa looked amazing today. Kang-seo thought about whether to tell her or not, because he feels that the source of the strange energy is the illegal ones who are on the prowl somewhere. But if he told her about it, how would he explain himself later? After all, this kind of intuition is not available to the F class. She will know who he is right away. He wasn't sure about that, though, so he decided to make sure. Meanwhile, the man laughed evilly and said, "Have fun, lowlifes, because this evening will be in their lives." The secretary respectfully said she brought him an exclusive wine in honor of his celebration. Asmod accepted the offering, stating that it was the kind of blood-red wine that was needed right now. After a while, he asked loudly if everything was ready. The black-clad men bowed and reported in unison that they were ready. He said ominously that in the second act, Clara would dance with the prince, and then the real performance would begin, all according to his will. He drew his sword, cut through the space, and announced with solemn gloom that it was time to go. On the roof, Asmod was pleased to note that they would have a great view from here. They could see the concert hall go up in flames. But suddenly a calm voice came from behind him, asking what he meant by the words, "blow up." Asmodi turned around abruptly and asked in astonishment who was in front of him. Kang-seo, carelessly adjusting his collar, wished him a good evening. Walking up to him and warming up, he said that he didn't want to spoil their mood but hoped for their cooperation. Asmod became furious, shouting that this madman at least knew who he was talking to. Before he could say anything, Kang Seo was in front of him and delivered a devastating blow that threw him aside. With a shake of his hand, Kang Seo remarked that it was apparently the same in all worlds, that attempts to have a civilized dialogue were taken as weakness, and that one's own language was leading people into the abyss. He glared at his opponent and ordered him to rise, unwilling to endure this comedy any longer. Kang Seo said with a slight chuckle that he hadn't hit him hard at all and didn't understand why he was so agitated. Asmod, panting with anger, shouted that he was a jerk and asked if he knew who was in front of him. Kang Seo asked who he was. The one proudly said that he was the great and powerful Asmod. Meanwhile, in his mind, he couldn't understand why he couldn't see his opponent's face. Kang Seo calmly replied that he basically didn't care who was in front of him, and demanded to explain what the one in the concert hall needed. Asmod shouted that he'd told him to plant a bomb. He said that the explosive device was placed in a supporting column of the building, and when it detonated, all the pathetic insects would die. Kang Seo clarified if his subordinate was telling the truth. Asmod boiled with anger and resented being called a subordinate since he was her boss. Kang Seo chuckled and suggested that perhaps it was the other way around and suggested that the farce should stop. The woman pretending to be the secretary smirked wickedly and admitted that Kang Seo had good intuition. She announced that she was tired of pretending to be a secretary and it was probably time to stop the show. The man angrily demanded an explanation, but no sooner had he finished than the woman threw a punch to his shoulder. Taking the sword from him, she pronounced that the artifact and even the name Asmod were not meant for the likes of him. Gasping, he struggled to mutter the words of accusation before he lost consciousness. Kang Seo stared at her and questioned who she was. The woman replied that she was the real Asmod, unlike this pathetic underdog. Kang Seo instantly went on the attack, asking if she was behind all of this. He threw a punch, but her body scattered in smoke. Kang Seo concluded that it was illusion magic. She appeared behind his back, and after noticing his reaction, she praised him for his quickness. Kang Seo asked incredulously if she was human or not. Asmod replied that such questions shouldn't be asked to girls, and added that she was keeping her name a secret, but perhaps she would introduce herself to him next time. With a swing of her sword, she opened the portal and was annoyed that she was going to miss a great show because of him, but she decided to forgive him because he was to her liking. With a laugh, she ran towards the portal, but stopped when she felt a strange resistance. She wondered why the portal opened by her artifact was suddenly distorted. Kang Seo, influencing the portal, asked if she thought he would let her go so easily. He remarked that her ability to cut space was interesting, but he had an answer for that. He would just sew up that space. Asmod uttered in horror that this was impossible, and inwardly thought he was very dangerous. Stepping back, she decided that the only way out was to take on a disembodied appearance and disappear. But Kang Seo, throwing a series of blows, challengingly asked how much longer she was going to dodge. Asmod realized with dismay that even in her incorporeal form, she could sense his attacks, and her skill was about to expire. Indeed, the ability had expired. In despair, she thought that if she were even one class higher, things would have been different. At this moment, Kang Seo concentrated the energy in his lower body and pushed her away with a powerful punch. Looking at the floor, he noticed black blood and calmly concluded that he knew she wasn't human. He wondered if she was a demon in female form. Asmod, holding her wounded shoulder in thought, admitted that this was a disaster. She couldn't escape, and she might have to resort to extreme measures. Kang Seo demanded with cold determination to say who she was, for her aura was too unusual. She laughed and asked with a smile if he would spare her if she told him the truth. In a direct question, he clarified if she was asking for mercy, to which she proudly replied, "No way." Suddenly, she quickly drew her sword and stabbed it straight into her chest with all her might. Kang Seo stunnedly said that he didn't expect that she would choose to die just to avoid revealing her identity. The one smiling through the pain said that maybe he misunderstood what was happening. Dissolving into smoke, she threw in that she was saying goodbye to the handsome man and hoped they would never meet again. Kang Seo, watching her disappear, muttered that he didn't know about this ability and probably should have suppressed it earlier and questioned her later. Meanwhile, the man lying on the floor bleeding heavily whispered that she had betrayed him and he would take revenge on her. Kang So asked to tell what their plan was, and he would avenge him himself. Asmode barely told him that the bomb was to explode during Clara and Prince's dance, and that there was a pyrokinetic among the audience. Then he fainted. Kang Seo looked at the concert hall and quietly repeated to himself among the audience, "So a bomb." Meanwhile, Ha-yoon watched the performance with delight and exclaimed, "How beautiful." So Young, sitting next to her, explained that next would be the waltz of flowers, and after that, the most interesting thing, Clara and Prince's dance. After a while, Li Xin, studying the blueprints of the building, clarified that the next act would be Clara and the Prince's dance. He recalled that someone of rank 0 had broken into his office, leaving a warning that there were illegals in the Myeongsan concert hall, and disappeared. And he also recalled the president's words that although it was unknown where he had gotten such information, it was most likely true. Holding out the blueprints, he gave the order to take a squad and head to the building, noting that there shouldn't be much trouble. Inwardly, he felt a strange aura, and comparing it to the blueprints, identified its source on the technical floor. Li Xin ordered to evacuate the civilians first, and the team immediately confirmed the execution. Running into the building, he ordered them to head to the basement. One of his subordinates shouted, calling for urgent evacuation, and asked to leave the building immediately. As they climbed the stairs, he thought that the director of the association had given them a plan of the building, and it had greatly accelerated their search, so they would have to thank him later. In the basement, Li Xin noticed a suspicious man and thought that there was a suspicious aura coming from him. This man approached and demanded to leave the area, as it was forbidden to enter here, no matter who they were. Li Xin grinningly repeated his words and then threw a punch, knocking the man out along with the door. A group of guys were revealed behind the door. One of them surprisingly asked who was there. Li Xin walked in, answering the horse in the coat and announcing that he had an arrest warrant. After quickly straightening them out, he shook his hands and noticed that there was really no problem with these people. As one of the detainees was led away, the man grinned evilly. Li Xin stopped his men and demanded an explanation as to why he was the one grinning. Grabbing the man by his shirt, he angrily said, "Confess what else he's hiding here." The man smirked in his face and asked defiantly, "Can't you smile already?" Li Xin released his intimidating aura and warned him that he would not ask 3 times, so he should confess. The man, sensing the danger, trembled and confessed that there was a bomber sitting among the audience in the concert hall. At that time, a loudspeaker blared an urgent evacuation warning due to the discovery of an illegal group in the building. Yu Sunti grabbed Ha-yoon and held her tightly, inwardly worrying where Kang So had disappeared to and if he was okay. Suddenly there was a man's shout. He said that it was too late for them to catch on. He would sacrifice his blood to the Great One. There was a massive explosion that destroyed half of the hall. People rushed to seek shelter in panic. At that moment, Kang So came running in, breathing heavily, and exclaimed that he apologized for the delay and asked if Suntai was all right. The men guarding the exit shouted that they would not let anyone out and told them to resign themselves to being victims to the Great One. The rescue team muttered in frustration and annoyance that the door was locked from the inside and wouldn't budge at all. Li Xin, without further ado, demanded that everyone step back and easily open the door with a foot. He stepped inside and firmly stated that their accomplices from the basement had already been arrested, and therefore they should stop resisting and surrender immediately. Joyful exclamations erupted among the people hidden in the room, for they recognized Li Xin, a C-grade hunter. One of the terrorists raised an explosive above his head and shouted that he had no intention of surrendering and vowed to take Li Xin away with him. He declared that he was a second-generation pyrokineticist and would dedicate their demise to the glory of the Great One. Li Xin thought that this man had completely lost his mind. He realized that this was very serious, and he wouldn't be able to contain the force of the explosion. Even if he tried to kill him first, the man would still manage to activate the spark and cause a detonation. But suddenly, he felt a strange but surprisingly familiar energy that enveloped the terrorist to stop the force of the explosion in case of detonation. This force consumed all the flames and completely neutralized the threat as if nothing had happened. The man, realizing the failure of his plan, tried to self-flame and explode. Li Xin rushed forward in time and prevented the explosives from hitting the fire. He realized that he had blown himself up with his own power. Anxiously, he asked if it was still possible to save him. One of the aides said he was still breathing, but he urgently needed resuscitation. Munji arrived, showing his ID, and discreetly asked to hand the injured man over to him. He identified himself as a Silver Tower hitman. When the aides asked the citizens to follow them to the exit, Kang So was relieved to see that everything was going according to plan and quietly showed a gesture of approval. Li Xin smiled at this gesture and thought that if it was him who was shown the bark. Suddenly, he realized that it was the same energy that had once stopped his attack at the restaurant. So it all fit together. Later, when everyone was led out to safety, Ha-Yun, wiping away her tears, quietly said that she was so excited to see Clara dance. One of the performers, hearing this, approached the girl and asked her with a gentle smile if she still wanted to see the dance. Ha-Yun, shining with joy, shook her head and said she really wanted to. Then the actress nodded and promised to perform it just for her. Instead of footlights over their heads hung a full moon with stars, and the stage was the street. Nevertheless, the Shining Star Ensemble gave the audience a performance they will remember forever. Later that night, Li Xin, determined to be a teacher, asked Kang So to be his teacher. Kang So mentally realized that he was really starting to get into trouble. The next day in the evening, Li Xin came to the Spring Pavilion restaurant. Upon seeing him, Kang So said in surprise that they were already closing, and then a thought flashed through his mind that he had expected this visit, but not so soon. Li Xin exclaimed that he knew who he was, a rank 0 awakened person. Kang So looked around and told him not to talk about it here, suggesting that they meet tomorrow at the same hour in a safe place. The next day, they met again. Kang So, apologizing, said he might have distracted him from important matters. But Li Xin assured him that he was willing to devote all his time to teaching him lessons. He thanked Kang So for his help, adding that it was because of him that the disaster was averted. Kang So then asked why he called him teacher. Li Xin said without a shadow of a doubt that he was not only his mentor, but also his savior. The pure and righteous heart method, he said, had given him back the ability to live as a human being. He also sincerely asked for forgiveness if he had been disrespectful when he came to his home. Li Xin recalled opening the door from the threshold and asking who he was and how he found him. Kang So then briefly explained that the illegals were going to launch a terrorist attack at Myeongsan Concert Hall. Hundreds of civilians would be in danger. He added that he understands if it would be hard for him to believe it, but he is telling the pure truth. Li Xin initially demanded proof, perplexed as to why he had approached him specifically. Kang So calmly replied that Li Xin was the only 0 rank awakened who could stop the threat. With slight embarrassment, Li Xin admitted that no one knew about his true level, but the teacher must have sensed his aura being purified by the very method. He again, sincerely, asked to be accepted as a disciple. Kang So thoughtfully asked why he wanted to do so. Li Xin enthusiastically explained that he really needed to become as strong as possible. Kang So noted that Li Xin was already incredibly strong and wondered why he was in a hurry. With his method, he would definitely grow. But the latter firmly said that he had seen Kang So's abilities the day before and realized how far away he was from them to save people just as effectively. He added that his family, friends, co-workers live in this city, and if South Korea is in danger, so are they. Kang So mentally recognized that they have almost similar reasons to use their power. He too wants to protect Sunday and his family because they have been so kind to him. Li Xin pleadingly extended his hand to him. Kang So thought that if he trained him, he could really become stronger. Then himself wouldn't have to interfere so often. He could soon become his assistant. Plus, if he became stronger, Sun Tae's simple hopes of safety in society could be fulfilled. He asked how old Li Xinya was. When he received the answer 32, he was surprised, for that was only 3 years less than his own age, and yet he was asking him to be a teacher? In the end, he offered a compromise, let him learn from him, but as an older brother, not as a mentor. In response, Li Xin immediately bowed and exclaimed happily, thanking him. Kang So offered to hold classes here, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, if it was convenient for him. The man immediately replied that he would agree to anything. Kang So immediately stated that he would begin the training immediately, starting with the techniques of the pure and righteous heart method. After an hour, Li Xin remarked that it was different when he himself taught him with such care. He asked what they would do next. Kang So replied that he had heard about his swordsmanship in swordsmanship. With pride, Li Xin confirmed it. Kang So regretfully pointed out that he didn't have a sword to practice with. Li Xin immediately responded and said if a weapon was needed, he had one. He pulled a graceful blade out of thin air and said that it was his favorite Windlord sword. Kang Xiu rounded his eyes in surprise and doubtfully asked if Li Xin had really just pulled a sword straight out of thin air. Li Xin nodded and leisurely explained that this technique was called inventory. He explained that it was quite a common attribute for awakened ones, then asked if Kang Xiu didn't already have his own. Kang Xiu frowned slightly and admitted that he remembered his teacher mentioning such things in class. He knew that such artifacts were very expensive, so he had simply forgotten about it. Then looking at the item again, he recognized that the item was useful. Li Xin took out another item from his inventory and said that if anything, he would gladly donate it. At the same moment, he added that the inventory was usually disguised as a tattoo on the body, and its capacity directly depended on the rank of the owner. After accepting the gift, Kang Xiu curiously asked how big Li Xin's inventory was. He replied with undisguised pride that after being promoted to rank 0, his inventory had expanded to the size of a 30-story building. Kang Xiu suddenly asked if Li Xin himself could go inside his own inventory. Li Xin confirmed that it was quite possibly something like a parallel dimension, but the time spent inside also depended on the level of the awakened person. Kang Xiu thanked and acknowledged that this could really come in handy, and then suggested that he move on to observing the sword technique. An hour passed, and the entire time, Kang Xiu silently observed every movement of the sword and body. He soon concluded that despite his obvious sense of rhythm in martial techniques, Li Xin's style was far from practical. He commanded him to stop and asked him to explain who he had learned from. Li Xin said that he had studied at the Hunter Academy, and the style he was demonstrating was called Manjiom. Kang Xiu nodded thoughtfully and bluntly said that the technique was certainly not that bad, but it lacked efficiency. He added that if Li Xin wanted, he could teach him a much more applied and useful fighting style. Li Xin gratefully bowed his head and sincerely stated that he was willing to learn, relying on him completely. Kang Xiu calmly said that the technique he was about to pass on was called the Sea Storm Sword. Kang Xiu held out his hand and asked to lend him the sword if Li Xin had another one. The latter replied that of course he had one. After receiving the weapon, he pulled it out of its sheath. Li Xin, watching this, thought that even in this simple movement, one could feel a power so crushing that it took one's breath away. Kang Xiu began his training and pronounced that the technique called Sea Storm Sword began with the first movement. As soon as he swung the blade, the air shook and the stone block split in half. Li Xin froze, stunned to the core, and marveled that he had split the stone so smoothly. He lit up with a radiant smile and joyfully exclaimed that it was simply unbelievable, astonishing to the point of shivering. Kang Xiu nodded and calmly explained that if you put energy into the sword at the very moment of impact, you could cut through almost any material. Li Xin wondered if he hadn't put a single drop of energy into the blade. Kang Xiu calmly confirmed that he hadn't, and added that if he had, the impact would have left a vortex instead of a shattered block. Li Xin thought that after all, 0 ranks are very different. He is so far away from him, he should try his best to learn. The next day, Kang Xiu was sweeping the street in front of the restaurant, and thought that the broom was much sturdier and more comfortable now that he had replaced its wooden handle with a steel one. His eyes caught the sign, and he froze with slight surprise, wondering when a bookstore had appeared. Li Xin walked out of the store door, waved his hand, and greeted Kang Xiu with a bright smile. He was surprised to hear that it was his store. Li Xin laughed and said that he wanted to tell him earlier, but he never chose the right time. Yu Suntai came out of the restaurant, and after calling Kang Xiu for lunch, he immediately noticed a familiar face. His eyes widened and he almost exclaimed, "Was it really Mr. Hunter?" Li Xin apologized for not stopping by to greet them earlier. He explained that he had opened a bookstore in the neighborhood. Yu Songtae happily confirmed that he had heard about the recent rescue and thanked him. He, surprised, clarified if this was the bookstore in question. Li Xin nodded and said with a smile that they would be friends collectively. Yu Suntai was amazed that the hunter had opened a store literally across the street from their restaurant, and a bookstore at that. Meanwhile, Ha Yun poked her head out and called everyone to eat. When she saw a familiar face, she shouted happily that it was the same uncle from the bookstore. Li Xin laughed and waved at her and called her little girl, adding that he was happy to see her. Yu Suntai asked if he had breakfast and invited him to join him. Li Xin embarrassedly replied that he didn't want to impose at such an early hour. So-yun said it was fine, and only needed to add one appliance. Li Xin said that it looked like he would have to be an annoying neighbor after all. After eating and putting away the utensils, he thanked them for the delicious meal, saying that he was full. Yu Songtae replied that she was happy to finally thank him in some way for saving their family. He bowed again and expressed his gratitude from the bottom of his heart. Li Xin said that he didn't need to, because he was just doing his duty. Yu Suntae, puzzled, clarified that he had noticed Li Xin constantly referring to Kang Xiu as his brother. He said that was just the way it was. Yu Suntae only inwardly wondered when Kang Xiu had time to befriend such a famous hunter. He admitted that although he had been friends with him for a long time, he was not always able to understand him. Li Xin, raising his hand, suddenly reminded that Hyun was supposed to tattoo the inventory stone. Kang Xiu slapped his forehead and admitted that he had completely forgotten and asked how it was done. Li Xin explained that it was very simple to put the stone where you wanted to tattoo and loudly say the word tattoo, and then the process would begin. Kang Xiu put the stone on his hand and it disappeared, and the tattoo began to appear on his skin. Li Xin, watching this, said that in order to open the inventory, you just have to say the command to yourself. He added that one should only visualize the desired item in one's mind, and a small portal would appear in front of the owner. By reaching into it, anything could be pulled out. He demonstrated this by pulling out a handle from the portal and suggested that Kang Xiu try to enter the portal himself. Kang Xiu hesitantly asked if it was worth it, but he closed his eyes and spoke the command. The next second, he found himself in the inventory space. He was surprised to see that Korangi had also found herself beside him. He placed her on his shoulder and turned to her, informing her that they were inside his inventory, which Li Xin said was capable of holding a huge building. Looking around, he wondered in amazement if the place was too spacious. Recalling the manual, he noticed that the inventory was safe for the owner and his property, no matter what was going on in it. He decided to practice a bit and work on the light body technique. After an hour, he said that the space is really huge. He can't even see the edges. Kang Xiu said that he had enough for today and would have a better look around tomorrow and gave the command to leave. Yu Suntae, noticing his arrival, asked with a smile, "How is it inside? Is there much space?" Kang Xiu confirmed that there was a lot of space, so much so that he wasn't sure of the actual size, comparing the place to an entire city. Li Xin shockingly thought that the size of the inventory was directly related to the strength of the owner. Then he wondered just how strong his brother was, and how much of a gulf there really was between them. Kang Xiu thoughtfully said that the space there is big, but it's a bit strange inside. There's not even a place to sit down. Li Xin explained that if he had magic stones, he could create anything he wanted inside his inventory, even buildings. Kang Xiu interestedly clarified if these were the stones that were in the monsters. Li Xin nodded and explained that only a registered hunter working in portals was officially authorized to obtain them. But in some regions, such as Gangwon-do province, there are many monsters that are not monitored by the association. Kang Xiu smiled slyly and said, "Meaning there are unaccounted monsters, those that no one has claimed rights to yet." Li Xin asked if he wanted to go with him to get the magic stone. He reminded him that no one had any rights to the monsters in that region, and added that he himself would like to hunt with him. Kang Xiu smiled broadly and agreed enthusiastically, saying that then he would finally have the opportunity to build something in his inventory. Li Xin replied that he had recently reached rank 0 as well, and now his inventory had greatly expanded. He too would be able to build something interesting. Yu Songtae, hearing their conversation, thought in his heart that although there were rumors about the incredible power of monsters in Gangwon-do, but right now he was somehow worried about these monsters instead of his friends. The next morning, Ha Yoon, excited and radiant, ran up to her father and excitedly declared that she wanted to be a ballerina. Her voice was ringing as she explained that she dreamed of dancing beautifully and twirling gracefully like the ballerinas she had recently seen. Yu Suntae suggested with a slight smile that it was probably the influence of the recent street performance of the artists. So Yoon added that she had asked around and it turned out that there was a choreography school not too far from them, and it was quite inexpensive to attend. Yu Suntae nodded approvingly and suggested that they go there together to see for themselves and ask questions. An hour later, they were already standing in the training hall of the school. The teacher counted out the rhythm in a clear voice and commanded to stretch out their arms. At that moment, a secretary entered the hall and, addressing the instructor, said that a family was here for a tour. Mrs. Siri greeted Ha-yoon with a warm smile. She gently asked if the girl wanted to learn ballet and offered to try on the clothes right away and try to practice a little. After that, Ha-yoon changed her clothes and got into formation with the other girls. The practice continued, and Siri sternly reminded her to keep her back straight. As she watched Ha-yoon enthusiastically perform the exercises, she inwardly noted that the girl certainly had aptitude. When the class was over, the female students politely thanked the teacher for the lesson. At this point, the man asked if this was the first time the family had come. Cherry replied that yes, they wanted to enroll the girl in the class, and added that she was seeing this student for the first time. But the girl had made a good impression on her. She then asked why he was interested. The man said that he had come not only to see her work, but also to look closely to see if there were any potential model candidates among the students. He reported that his ability had reacted to this girl. Sari questioned if his ability to recognize talent had actually worked. The man confirmed that it had, and admitted that it was the first time he'd seen a child so gifted, and asked if she could give him the parent's phone number. Cherry reminded him about protecting personal information, telling him that things like this don't get resolved so quickly. She asked him to explain the purpose of his interest in the girl. Later, So-young shared the happy news. Yu Sun-tae, not believing his ears, asked again if their Ha-yoon was really being cast. She explained that the dance teacher's older brother works in the marketing department of the famous Ellenin's agency, and expressed his desire for their daughter to be the face of a major children's clothing brand. She added that this is not a one-off photo shoot at all. The agency intends to take Ha-yoon to full training at the agency's modeling school. Yu Sun-tae excitedly said that his daughter will become a real model and said that she looks so much like So-young. That's why she's so beautiful. So-yoon replied with a smile that she looked like both of them without a doubt. She added with a slight chuckle that his ears stick out a bit, but that's no big deal.